Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and call the Assembly Committee on Judiciary to order this morning. Mr. Secretary, could you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbrey Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasny.
Here. Here.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Wen.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Orentlicker. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
And Chairman Yeager.
Here. We do have a quorum. I expect Assemblyman Orentlicker to be here shortly, so I'll try to remember to mention when he arrives and we can mark him present. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to our members. Good morning to members of the public who are watching either on the legislature's website or on our YouTube channel. And welcome to day 9 of the 2021 Nevada Legislature. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. Members, if you could remember to mute your microphones when you're not speaking, that'll help with the feedback. For our presenters today, I know it's a little bit awkward, but if you could remember to state your name each time before you speak, particularly when someone asks you a question, that'll make it easier for our committee secretary to accurately prepare the minutes. I'll try to remind you if you forget to do that, because I know it's really not a natural thing. A couple other things I wanted to mention. We do expect courtesy and respect to one another in these meetings. We don't always agree on policy. That's perfectly okay, but we need to make sure we're doing that in a respectful way. And then finally, committee members in this virtual world are often using multiple devices to participate in Zoom, to look at exhibits, to communicate with each other since we're not in the same room. So please don't see it as a sign of disrespect or inattention if members have to look away and appear to be looking at other devices. That's just the world we're living in for the moment. So with that behind us, we'll get onto our agenda today. Members, as you see, we have 2 different presentations on the agenda today, and then of course we'll have our public comment period. I'm going to take the items slightly out of order, and I'm going to first take the presentation from the Nevada Gaming Control Board. Members, you might recall we had this originally scheduled for Thursday, but we moved it to this morning. So I want to welcome to the committee Mr. Bryn Gibson, who is the chairman of the Gaming Control Board, and we'll give him an opportunity to go through his presentation, and then, like always, we'll have a period of time where we can ask questions. So, Mr. Gibson, welcome back to the Assembly Judiciary Committee, and please proceed with your presentation when you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Yeager, for that warm welcome. Members of the committee, my name is Bryn Gibson. It's an honor to be before you today. There are so many new members that I should probably introduce myself more fully. I started my career at Lionel Sawyer & Collins in the Gaming and Regulatory Division there. Spent 7 years there under a man named Bob Fess, who was one of the primary authors of the 1955-56 Gaming Control Act. I went from there to the Attorney General's office and was chief of the Gaming Division, which is the primary legal service provider to the Gaming Control Board and Commission. After that, I was general counsel to Governor Sisolak twice. I did it once for an extended period, and then I came back this last summer to fill in after Kyle George in the AG's office stepped back into his original first assistant role. I have with me Mr. Michael Morton, who spent 4 years in LCB as an attorney. Those are formative years for him, and so he is well-trained in LCB statutory construction and drafting. And I'm pleased to have him here with me. He's a face that you may recognize. You have the board packet that we've distributed to all of you, and I'm going to be going through that and just outlining the nature of the Nevada Gaming Control Board and our regulatory structure. So you can use that to follow along. And Mr. Chairman, would you like me to take questions throughout the discussion or at the end, or how would you like me to conduct this?
Thank you for asking, Mr. Gibson. And of course, I neglected to mention your substantial background in gaming and the work that we've done together. But I think what makes sense, what we've been trying to do is just kind of have you go through the presentation, and then I'll ask members to hold questions to the end, only because on Zoom it's a little clunky sometimes to try to talk at the same time. So it seems to be the best for record keeping. So we'll give you a chance to do that, but I'm sure we'll have some questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start by just giving you all a sense of the scope and size of the gaming industry in Nevada. And this is on the introductory page of the board information packet. So at the end of fiscal year ending June 2020, we had 267 non-restricted licensees, and these are the bigger licensees. They generated $18.3 billion in gaming revenue. Within our 267 non-restricted licensees, we had 135,926 employees. Now, non-restricted licensees are the bulk of the industry in terms of size and gaming revenue, but we also have a very large restricted industry as well. And so we have, I'd say probably close to 200,000 total employees in bars and taverns, which are restricted, and non-restricted licensees, which are casino resorts and larger casinos. Nevada is the United States' largest gaming market. We have 55% of all commercial gaming employment in this state. So it's a major market. We've learned through roughly 70 years of experience in administering the modern, that is 1955 to 56 Nevada Gaming Control Act, that the Gaming Control Board's reputation and the state's reputation is based in large part on our philosophy that gaming, when properly regulated, can thrive and be an important part and contributor to the state's economy. The board's reputation is built on the practice and philosophy of consistent, legal, ethical, and fair-minded approaches and practices supported by the most rigorous licensing, suitability, and operating standards in the world. And this together creates a world-class gaming environment. Many people use the term gold standard regulatory structure or agency. It really is this rigorous licensing, suitability, and operating standard, the most rigorous in the world, that I think makes up that gold standard sort of premise. We also understand acutely the need to maintain balance between our rigorous standards for the gaming industry and the difficulty in getting into the gaming industry through backgrounding and investigation and licensing strictness, with the sort of legally acceptable and ethically sound flexibility necessary to allow for innovation and expansion of the gaming industry so that it will continue to be an economic driver in our state. Many of you have probably heard that the demographic of gaming is changing. The kinds of games they play are changing constantly. And in turn, our industry needs to be able to evolve to keep up and maintain the kind of interest level among the groups of people who travel in order to be the driver of one of the primary drivers of Nevada's economy. We're constantly weighing these two primary directives, or if you're a Star Trek fan, these prime directives in the balance as we regulate, as we amend regulation, and as we introduce statute to the People's Branch, to you all to consider to amend the primary chapters that we administer, which are NRS 462, 3, 463A, B, 464, 465, 466. The board works in close coordination with the Nevada Gaming Commission. I'll use the terms board and commission from hereafter just to shorten the discussion and to avoid duplication. Both of these entities together, the board and commission, in this two-part system, are charged with protecting the integrity and stability of the gaming industry through in-depth investigation procedures, precise and demanding licensing practices, and strict enforcement of laws and regulations, and holding gaming licensees to the very highest standards in operating. We assume and accept that we, as Nevada's gaming regulatory bulwark, are responsible not only for protecting Nevada's citizenry and residents, but also the millions and millions of visitors that have historically come to Nevada to play and enjoy our gaming and hospitality industries. On page 3 of our information packet, you'll see an overview of the board and commission. This page illustrates our two-tiered structure. I'm the chairman of the Gaming Control Board. I was appointed to this position after serving over the summer in an interim capacity as general counsel to Governor Sisolak, and then leaving and joining a large law firm, national law firm, where I practiced gaming law, technology law, water law, and items like that. I also serve as chair in the capacity as executive director of the Gaming Control Board. And so I'm responsible for its budget. I'm responsible for overseeing all of the various divisions, 6 primary divisions inside of the agency, for human resources decisions, and for interacting with the governor's office as a sort of an attenuated or tangential member of his cabinet. And the reason I say it that way is that historically there's been sort of a hands-off approach from the governor's office and elected officials toward quasi-judicial bodies, and the Gaming Control Board, just given its importance in maintaining the robustness and being able to discipline even the most important licensees, that sort of separation has been crucial. And so I'm a part of the cabinet, but I'm not in the middle of the cabinet discussions. We are the 24/7 day-to-day gaming regulators that operate in full-time positions. And what this means is that this is my only job. I'm prohibited from having other employment. And so all day long, every day, I and my colleagues, member Phil Katsaros, who was appointed in 2019, and member Terry Johnson, who the governor just announced is in a holdover position. He served a full 8 years. His term expired. He, under a 1911 AGO, is able to basically roll over into the next term and continue to serve with full authority. And this is helpful. As an aside, this is a helpful thing for me because as a new chair, I'm tasked with not only the traditional duties of regulating the industry, the gaming industry, but also with mitigating COVID, with ensuring that our many licensees are protecting their staff, and that they're following the COVID mitigation enforcement, mitigation efforts, maintaining the limitations on occupancy. 25% of casino floor occupancy right now is a limitation under Directive 35. And we're also in the middle of a legislative session. So it's helpful to have a holdover member such as Terry Johnson with 8 years of full service. The Gaming Commission is a 5-member commission. It is a part-time body, and they are a policy setting body. So they set the policy, the gaming policy, for the board and for the state. This is done in conjunction with you all as the people's branch. You make the laws, you set into statute, primarily NRS 463. You set in statute the policy, but with regard to sort of more granular policy, the Gaming Commission sets that, and we follow it and implement it. The board and commission meet separately, but at least monthly in public meetings. The chair of the Gaming Commission is John Moran, a longtime Southern Nevada resident in Nevada. His father was the sheriff, as you may know. His colleagues on the commission include Ms. Deborah Fuchs, Ms. Rosa Solis-Rainey, Ms. Adana Brown, and Mr. Stephen Cohen. An especially important role within Nevada's gaming regulatory structure is the executive secretary. And I make special note of this position for reasons that'll become obvious in a second. This person serves as the clerk and parliamentarian of the board and the commission, and assists both bodies in calendaring and conducting all their meetings, as well as with a number of other administrative matters. I make this note because the person who brought me back to Nevada, I'd say, I have family here and I have long ties here, or deep ties here, but Bob Fess was the primary reason I came back to Nevada to practice law. And Bob was the first executive secretary of the newly formed under Governor Grant Sawyer, Nevada Gaming Control Board and Gaming Commission. Today we have Marie Bell, who was outstanding. She does a remarkable job, and she's an outstanding public servant, and I very much enjoy working with her. On pages 6 through 8, you'll see an overview of Nevada gaming regulation and its evolution in Nevada. On page 8, there's an outline of the board and commission functions. As I mentioned, the board and commission administer chapters 462, 3, 463B, 464, 465, and 466. And this may sound like it's a whole lot of chapters, but each one has a very unique purpose, plays a role, and we administer each one. 463 is the primary chapter, but the others have important roles as well, and I deal with most of them on a weekly basis, at least. As a two-tiered regulatory structure, we in the context of licensee discipline, the board opens investigations into observed or claimed, that is reported, inappropriate behavior of a licensee. If the complaint rises to the level of discipline, that is, if it satisfies our counsel, the Gaming Division of the Attorney General's office, and it satisfies the members of the board, that it meets the standards of more likely than not, that standard, then we'll draft a complaint and file it against a licensee with the commission. In such disciplinary matters, the board acts in a prosecutorial role, while the commission acts as a judicial body or decision-making body. The commission determines ultimately whether the discipline is appropriate and whether what the type and magnitude of the discipline should be. In the context of applications for licensing and for findings of suitability, the board makes recommendations to the commission. The commission can accept the recommendation. They can also limit, deny, they can condition any application in the context of, that is, when they move to allowing or approving the license or finding suitability. When adopting regulations, the board often introduces regulatory changes. We workshop them, we hold public workshops and so on, and we hear from the industry. The commission is ultimately responsible with discharging those and accepting and adopting any final regulations. Another part of the gaming regulatory structure that's noted on page 9, and one that you may not have heard of, is the Gaming Policy Committee. This is created in statute 4630121, and it's a vestige of history. It lay dormant for a long time until Governor Sandoval he reinvigorated it. He used it in particular to consider esports as a new type of gaming. We categorized as a group esports, that is a regulatory agency, esports as an other event as opposed to a sporting event. The benefit of that is it's avoided catching the esports, at least to this point, catching it up in the Wire Act discussions that are going on, because the Wire Act has been clarified by one of the circuits on the East Coast recently to apply only to sports and information used in the placement of a better wager in the context of sports. The Gaming Policy Committee consists of a member of the Assembly, of the Senate, an enrolled member of a Nevada Native American tribe, a member of the Gaming Control Board, member of the Gaming Commission, 2 members of the general public, 2 representatives of the non-restricted licensing economy, 2 members of the restricted gaming licensing economy, and 1 member of academia with knowledge of gaming and gaming related items. UNLV, as you may know, has a robust gaming studies program, an LLM. They have academics over there, Bo Bernhardt in particular, but others, David Schwartz, who study these things on a regular basis and are outstanding members when they do rotate through the Gaming Policy Committee. The Policy Committee, as I just noted, it takes up big issues. In addition to esports, Governor Sandoval activated the Gaming Policy Committee to take on the question of the intersection of cannabis or marijuana with gaming. And as some of you may know, I had my nickname last session in the governor's office was Seed to Sale. And that may mean nothing to some of you, to others, it may mean something. I know to Chairman Yeager, he probably has some context. So the governor asked me to, with my regulatory background, to stand up a new agency, the CCB, the Cannabis Compliance Board, and tracking from seed to sale through their systems, the growth of marijuana is a key metric, and the intersection of something that is federally illegal or at least questionably illegal, and on a state basis, just due to the vote of the people, we'll call it legal. There's preemption, but nonetheless, we're acting as though it's legal. That was a major question because early on, the strict regulation of gaming suggested that we should keep them entirely separate. There are some areas where they do intersect, however. For example, the not pamphlets, but the magazines that are placed for free inside of the rooms in hotels on gaming resort properties. They would advertise cannabis licensees, and that was open question that Governor Sandoval considered. On page 10, we'll start going through the various divisions of the Gaming Control Board. The first is the Administration Division. Ms. Jamie Black is she's the chief of the Administration Division, and she manages approximately 44 employees. The Administration Division is tasked with a number of different things. Within that division, we have our HR function. We have a new director of human resources. We have all of our training. We have our accounting, budget, record keeping. We also have a professional standards or internal affairs function that is housed within the Administration Division. And so in the context of wrongdoing or any kind of issue or problem with an agent, the Internal Affairs Division would review and investigate and adjudicate that kind of issue. The board's economist and the Economic Analysis Division is also housed within the Administrative Division. And Michael Lawton is currently in this role. It's a critical role because the process or the function of projecting gaming revenue is not strictly, and I think you've heard this from your own analysts, it's not strictly a scientific exercise. It's not just based in stats. It's also very much an art. I mean, one of the questions right now is to what degree people are going to return to Las Vegas and Nevada as a destination, insofar as habits have changed and people are accustomed to going to places closer to their homes. And so Mike Lawton, he's part scientist, part statistician, and he's part artist. So he provides to the Economic Forum the gaming revenue projections that are critical to the Economic Forum's development of the baseline sort of projected revenue for the state that the governor then uses as the foundational amount for his governor's recommended budget. In addition, Mike Lawton, our economist, also undertakes special research projects at my request and other members of the board's requests. On page 12, you'll see the Audit Division. The Audit Division is a critical division. There are very few agencies in government, especially regulatory agencies, that administer taxes, especially taxes of the magnitude that the Gaming Control Board administers. I noted at the very beginning that our licensee, our non-restricted licenses, just one part of our licensing sort of universe, generates over $18 billion in revenue each year. We have a 99% collection rate on our taxes and fees. And the reason for that is our Audit Division and the fact that we very strictly enforce the audit requirements. They operate on a 2 to 3 year cycle, meaning that they go through each of the non-restricted licensees, group 1 licensees, and these are the very large casinos with revenue. At least in 2019, the threshold for being a group 1 licensee was $6.5 million in revenue, so the Audit Division does conduct on a 2 to 3 year cycle full audits of each of the non-restricted licensees. They also review and promulgate and enforce the minimum internal control standards. And these are developed over the years. They're, for example, how cash is counted, how counts take place in count rooms, how chips, how different, especially as you have multifunctional games, how the revenue is reported, in addition to a number of other things. The primary objective of the audit division, of course, is to determine the proper reporting of gaming revenue and entertainment revenue, and to determine if a casino is in compliance with the applicable laws and live entertainment's regulations and laws. Additionally, the division periodically develops cash counts to ensure that casinos have sufficient funds. So very often casinos will they'll advertise a progressive jackpot, for example, and we have to make sure that audit will make sure that they have sufficient cash on hand to pay out if that were to come due, or to pay out in an annuity or some other form over time if it comes due. They also analyze annual financial statements. They monitor the entity's continuing financial viability. They prepare reports for the board and commission to determine and ascertain certain key details of transactions. And they monitor performance of all casino games in the state. On page 15, you'll see the Enforcement Division outline. The Enforcement Division is a unique division, and one that's played a critical role during COVID. Mike Morton, who's with us, as I noted, will discuss that role more at the end of my presentation. He is, so the chief of the Enforcement Division is James Taylor, and he manages roughly 91 sworn peace officers and 29 support staff members in Carson City, Reno, Elko, Las Vegas, and Laughlin. By statute, all employees of the Nevada Gaming Control Board are peace officers. Our agency is statutorily a law enforcement agency as well. Chief Taylor and his Enforcement Division are unique in the sense that he has a large number, 91, post-certified officers. And many of them, the numbers decreased over time, but have been cross-deputized with important federal agencies to work on key cases. They've been cross-deputized with the FBI, Homeland Security, DEA. And this is important because it allows them to work on high-powered task forces that look into things like money laundering. And for those of you who are fans of Netflix, the show Ozark, for example, gives you sort of an insight into the way that casinos can be used to launder money. These task forces that our audit agents sit on and enforcement agents sit on are critical to ensuring that organized crime and syndicates don't infiltrate and don't have any presence inside of the gaming industry. The Enforcement Division is also responsible for conducting criminal and regulatory investigations and for arbitrating disputes between patrons and licensees. They are often involved or called upon by federal agencies to provide expertise in anti-money laundering investigations in sensitive cross-jurisdictional and federal state investigations. In fact, their investigations range from simple violations that may prompt a patron dispute, where a patron may believe, for example, that a device has malfunctioned, all the way up to the most complex investigations that may involve the SEC, Department of Justice, may implicate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the Bank Secrecy Act, which would then trigger the involvement of the Department of Treasury and the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, the Department of Justice, FBI, and Homeland Security. Requirement for serving in the Enforcement Division is either a college degree or a background or education in law enforcement. They're all sorts of post-certified. These are all post-certified, firearm carrying officers. They're required to complete gaming academies and field training programs. And they're also able to conduct covert operations into criminal activities involving gaming enforcement and to make recommendations to the Gaming Control Board regarding potential candidates for inclusion in the list of excluded persons, which has historically been referred to as the Black Book. They also conduct and inspect and approve new games, chips, and tokens, especially those that are, they're often involved in cases where there are counterfeit chips and tokens, and they're on the front lines of these new RFID sort of embedded chips as well. The Enforcement Division has a Special Investigations Unit. The Special Investigations Unit I worked with extensively when I was in the AG's office and Chief of the Gaming Division. These individuals within this unit have very particularized expertise. Some of them are cyber forensic experts. Others are experts in AML, Bank Secrecy Act. They interface and have the trust of, in many cases, of our federal counterparts. And so this allows for information sharing, both back and forth. The Nevada Gaming Control Board requires that licensees and employees follow not only our own state law, but also the law of each jurisdiction, that is at the local, at the regional, and at the federal level. And so this foreign gaming requirement is also an important item that the Enforcement Division oversees, and they receive reports and they monitor closely any violation of foreign law, which we may then use as a predicate to take action against the licensee here in Nevada. That's a statutory provision, by the way, if you're wondering what would give us sort of the long arm reach to discipline a licensee in Nevada over a violation of a foreign law. That's a requirement under NRS 463. On page 18, the Investigations Division is discussed, and the Investigations Division is a crucial division. Mike Labadie is chief of the division. He is a 30-year board employee, and no one knows more about the whole corpus of gaming investigations than Chief Labadie does. He has a team of roughly 79 individuals. All agents have college degrees. They have business and financial backgrounds. They conduct extensive criminal justice and financial investigations into all applicants. I can't overstate the importance of a robust investigations division. These individuals are the ones who receive and investigate all licensees and applicants for suitability. They produce exhaustive reviews of applicants' personal backgrounds and their financial backgrounds. The Investigations Division and its meticulous work is imperative to ensuring Nevada remains the international leader in the gaming space. What I can tell you is that very often licensees, they're familiar with the rigor of our licensing process, and so depending on the strength or weakness of their position, whether or not they're a company or entity or individual, have individuals on their key employee positions that would warrant licensing, they may either try to run Nevada first or get licensed in Nevada first, because Nevada's licensing standards are so strict that if you achieve it here, it's seen as an imprimatur or suggestion that you can be licensed anywhere in the world. Other weaker applicants may try to run the gauntlet in weaker jurisdictions or jurisdictions with sort of less rigorous standards, and collect those licenses, I'll call it. That is, get as many as they can, and then come to Nevada and show us this voluminous number of licenses and suggest to us that they have the probity and background to be licensed here. And that's not a very persuasive way to do things, but it is something that I've seen through my tenure on the board, but also as a gaming lawyer and as a member of the AG's office. Our investigative agents review and analyze entities or activities of all privately held companies seeking licensure registration. And they produce comprehensive background reports for board members and commission members for review. We had a board meeting last week, and there was one item on the agenda, and I want to make sure it's hard to do visuals these days, given the remoteness of everything, but this is the report. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this report? This is the report over a 500-page set of documents for one non-restricted applicant. that should give you some insight into the depth and breadth of the investigative review that our investigative agents do. It's an exhaustive process. Many people who go through it and have been through other processes, including backgrounding for important, clearance required jobs at the federal level, will say that this process is as rigorous or more rigorous than any other they've been through. The Investigations Division has offices in Las Vegas and Carson City. It includes an applicant services section, and the individuals in this section, they take in all of the forms and documentation associated with an application. And in many ways, they serve as the sort of front line and the liaison of our office, because they interact with the public and with those who are seeking licenses and findings of suitability from the board and commission. They collect all fees associated with these applications and filings. They respond to information requests, and they're in a position to provide incredible information to those seeking licensure in Nevada. They also respond to requests regarding those who've gone through our process. So we maintain meticulous and exhaustive records of our licensees and applicants. And jurisdictions around the world will query our agency, asking for indicators of, good behavior or bad behavior, and what we think about various applicants. And members of the investigative staff will respond to those kinds of inquiries. Investigators in the Investigations Division also registers individuals who bring other individuals to Nevada casinos for what they call junkets. The junket economy is not in its best shape right now. I mean, there's very little fly-in traffic to the gaming resorts, but historically that's been a big part of the business. They also monitor the semi-annual reports of key employees submitted by the non-restricted gaming licensees. There's the corporate security section is an important section of the Investigations Division. In addition to having privately held companies, we also have our share of publicly traded companies. And these are companies that are publicly traded on stock exchanges throughout the world, including the London Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, NYSE, Tokyo Stock Exchange. The requirement statute is that the stock exchange is one that has standards that are more or less similar to those of the best ones in the United States, so the NYSE, for example. And as these corporations file their 8Ks and 10Ks and documentation with the SEC, for example, here in the United States, the corporate securities section will review those documents as well. These investigators prepare highly detailed reports used by the board and commission that assist us in making licensing recommendations and decisions. They help our compliance unit to audit and review the company compliance plans. And they help us to see into the companies and ensure that they're acting appropriately as they should, and reflecting well on the reputation of the state and on the gaming industry. On page 21, you'll see an outline of the Tax and License Division. Mr. Dan Douglas is chief of the Tax and License Division, and he manages roughly 21 team members. This division has primary jurisdiction over Group 2 licensees, and these are those that would, under the 2019 thresholds, would make under have revenue under $6.5 million. So when I mentioned the audit division earlier is involved in auditing Group 1 casinos, those grossing $6.5 million and above, and so tax and license is involved in auditing those that are, or reviewing those that gross $6.5 million or less. The Tax and License Division is also on a 2 to 3 year audit cycle. Tax and License has three primary roles. They conduct collections, they review compliance, and they collect. They of course collect and deposit and distribute gaming taxes and fees, and they assess penalties, interest, and fines. The compliance section performs compliance reviews of compliance plans. Compliance plans are plans that are put in place to ensure that vendors have appropriate probity, that in some cases it's lawyers or outside counsel or people who are hired in non-employee status have the kinds of people you'd want around a gaming operation. They also review certain kinds of transactions. These are all parts of a compliance plan, and the compliance section of the Tax and License Division reviews these for Group 2 casinos. On page 23, you'll see there's an overview of the Technology Division. And the Technology Division is overseen by Mr. Jim Barbie. He has roughly 26 employees who range in background from EEs, that is electrical engineers, to auditors, to technical experts, to cyber forensic experts. And for those of you who may take a look at when you're pumping gas, and I was pumping gas this morning, there's an insignia or an imprimatur on the gas pump that says Jim, that historically has had the name Jim Barbie on it. So attesting to the accuracy of the measure, or of the pump's sort of, of its logging of the gas that's meted out. This Jim Barbie is not the same Jim Barbie, just as an aside, who runs the Technology Division. Our Jim is a technologist of the highest order himself, and we're lucky to have him. The Technology Division maintains gaming and technology lab on Pilot Road near the airport, where many of Nevada's gaming manufacturers are located. The lab tests new games and systems. It reviews all technology used in gaming devices, associated equipment, intercasino link systems, the back-end accounting systems, and so on. The division makes recommendations to me as chair for approximately 2,000 yearly or annual new and modified gaming device approvals and associated equipment approvals. This division also assists technology innovators as they come into the state to understand what's required to get a device onto the gaming floor. Oftentimes this is an eye-opening process. It's not easy, but the Technology Division is there to assist and to help them understand, especially those who want to make changes for the better in terms of innovation. Let's see here. The Technology Division also serves as the board's forensic investigative unit. As the world has changed and gone from sort of a paper world to one that's lived on computers, as we're doing right now, the ability to investigate through forensic analysis has become much more important, especially in the context of cybersecurity. So if there's a hacking event, or there's a malware, or there's a ransomware attack, very often the board's forensic investigative staff, which is part of the Technology Division, will be the ones that work with the FBI's technologists in ascertaining the cause or the origin of the attack, but also in reviewing the after action report that we get to determine whether or not there was sufficient information security in place to prevent the attack to begin with. The division is the primary point of contact for new gaming devices and systems, which manufacturers wish to have approved by recommendation of the board and disposition of the commission. And again, I just want to emphasize the importance of innovation to me and new technology to me and to our board and to the commission, to our staff. It's critical that we maintain and keep up with the habits and with the growth of new technologies. I mean, my children who are remote school right now very often are playing games with their cousins and family members and people in foreign countries at the same time. And as our habits change and we move to an online a mixture of an online and physical world, we need to make sure that our gaming industry keeps up. And the Technology Division is there to assist. But the process is more complex than one might think. You've got to develop internal control standards, security standards. You got to ensure that as games are offered in different contexts, that is online or through brick and mortar casinos, that is physical games, that the revenue's appropriately reported, and that will always be a primary goal of both technology in reviewing systems, especially accounting systems, together with the auditing department. On page 25 of the document, there are some key metrics, and I'll go to the document now to pull it up. We'll go through some of these quickly. So these are all, this is data that's as of June 30th, 2020. We had a total of, let's see here, we had a total of 461 non-restricted, that is group 1 and group 2 licensees. We had 1,984 restricted licensees, and then we had 50 slot room operators. We had 378 manufacturers, distributors, and 39 other types of licensees. Going back to the distinctions between the types of licensees, a non-restricted gaming license or licensee is one that has 16 or more slot machines, or any number of slot machines, 1 to 15, and any combination of, or any other type of, any table game, any other race book or sports pool, a slot route operator license, or inter-casino link system, or operates a mobile gaming system. So that's a non-restricted license or licensee. A restricted licensee is everything else. So it's 15 or fewer machines is what determines, or what categorizes or qualifies a licensee as a restricted licensee. On page 27, you'll see an overview of our slot device information. And you'll note that we had a total of, in non-restricted locations, we had a total of 110,472 devices, slot devices. Multi-denominational devices were the most popular. In restricted locations, we had 17,619 slot devices, for a grand total of 128,091 total slot devices. Below that, you can see that the numbers and types of table, card, and counter games, for a total of 4,228 total other types of games. Page 28, the gaming revenue numbers, which are interesting. If you go down to the second set of numbers, so fiscal year 2020, our total gaming win, so that is revenue, was $9,327,965. And you can see it broken out by category. Slot device is $6,200,000, and or million. And then you've got table, card, and counter games at $3,126,000,000, and so on. See, what else do we have here? You can see it broken out by county, if that's interesting to you. The final set of numbers, the bottom of the page on 28 is, I mean, one of the things that I've noted in my career is that the mixture of revenue, it's growing for gaming licensees, but it's changing. So you're starting to see revenue come from other places. So food and beverage is a big deal. You see that as a total in fiscal year 2020 of over 4 million, 4.5 million roughly. I'm sorry, billion roughly. You see the total room take, which is 4,719,000,000, and then other. So let's go to page 29 and discuss quickly the tax and license fee collection structure in Nevada. We have a gross revenue tax structure that's graduated. It's applied on a monthly basis, and the way it works is that for the first $50,000 of gross gaming revenue, the tax is 3.5%. Beyond that, on the next $84,000, the tax is an additional 4.5%. Beyond that, for revenue that exceed the below, that is $134,000, For anything above that, you've got 6.75% is the highest rate of gross gaming revenue tax that's applied. So we collect annual and quarterly taxes on each gaming device and table games. So there's the gross gaming tax, which is one kind of tax, and the majority of the tax that makes up the roughly 40% or 36% of general fund. But you also have device taxes that are levied. And then you have restricted gaming locations that pay annual and quarterly taxes according to the schedule that's outlined there. So annual fees of $250 per slot, and then quarterly fees of $81 per slot for the first 5 slot devices plus, and so on. See on page 30, there's an additional breakout of collections statewide. And then we have the different kinds of taxes over a 5-year period below. That is the percentage fees, entertainment tax, that is LET, live entertainment tax, which is contained in NRS 368A. It was restructured, as you may know, a few years ago. So it's a different tax than it was historically. And then on page 31, I just draw your attention to the way that the tax collections are distributed, at least historically. This year, fiscal year 2020 was an anomalous year, of course, and it's different. But in 2019, let's say 2019 is a standard year, you'd have general fund monies of $874 billion, $129 million, and so on. A billion. I'm sorry. These are in billions. I'm sorry, million. $1,310,380 would be dedicated to problem gambling, and then you'd have dedicated funds that are distributed to schools and counties of $44,077,386, and then these are aggregated over statewide, over the state. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Michael Morton to discuss some of the board's efforts over the past year, which have gone far beyond just traditional gaming regulation. Mr. Morton, if I can, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson and Mr. Morton. Good to see you again in the committee. And when you're ready, please go ahead.
Chair, good morning, committee members. Mike Morton with the Gaming Control Board for the record. While the Gaming Control Board's presentation of its operational overview to this committee has remained consistent over recent sessions, this past legislative interim obviously tested the mettle of the board and the state of Nevada as a whole. Since the governor issued his declaration of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic on March 12, 2020, the board has operated at the forefront of the administration's pandemic response, taking on responsibilities not necessarily germane to the board's regular operations. However, the board's employees accepted their new responsibilities in stride. Upon the issuance of Emergency Directive 2 on March 17, 2020, the board's enforcement division ensured that all gaming licensees had ceased operations and that all gaming assets were properly secured upon closure, almost all within 24 hours. This was a statewide closure operation from the Las Vegas Strip to Jackpot, Nevada, not a small logistical or geographic lift. After gaming operations were halted, the board's executive offices and administration division really shifted into overdrive to help the state get a handle on COVID-19. The chair of the board at the time, Sandra Douglas Morgan, aided the governor's COVID-19 Response, Relief, and Recovery Task Force in acquiring PPE from across the globe so that Nevada's frontline healthcare professionals could continue doing the unbelievable and amazing work that they were doing in the spring of 2020 and are still doing today. Full well knowing that the gaming industry would reopen at some point, the board was acutely aware that it had to be prepared for licensees that wanted to reopen quickly. Board members Terry Johnson and Phil Katsaros issued policy memoranda to various types of licensees that created regulatory efficiencies for the industry to resume operations when it was allowed to do so. When these memoranda were issued on April 21st and May 5th, 2020, the board members had no idea when the industry would restart, but knew that the board's response would need to be both efficient and effective. The board also realized that the 78-day shutdown of the industry and a safe, incremental, and gradual reopening would, and still continues to cause great economic harm to everyday Nevadans, those gaming employees that make the industry thrive. Unfortunately, the federal government's view and handling of the gaming industry had been outdated for decades. When the Federal Small Business Administration issued rules implementing Congress's Paycheck Protection Program, any business that derived more than 30% of its revenue from gaming was shut out of the program. Then Chairwoman Morgan and the board's economic analyst Mike Lawton took action to ensure that Nevada's federal delegation, as well as those representing the gaming industry's interests on the federal level, had the financial and employment data necessary to convince the federal government to change its eligibility rules governing the Paycheck Protection Program. As you just heard, while the Gaming Control Board is full of experts of all types, economic, law enforcement, forensic, investigative, and technological, board leadership knew that it could not create its reopening policies in a silo. The board's administration division, headed by Chief Jamie Black, spent weeks consulting federal, state, and local public health authorities while crafting its health and safety policies for reopening after temporary closure due to COVID-19. The board issued its first iteration of the policies on May 1st, 2020, a full month before gaming operations were allowed to resume. Noting that the science surrounding COVID-19 was and is changing constantly, the board knew that these policies would have to be living documents. Since their initial issuance this past May, the reopening policies have been amended multiple times based on changing scientific recommendations and ensuing emergency directives from the Office of the Governor. The most important part of the continuous drafting of the health and safety policies came on May 20th, 2020, when the board held an informational workshop related to COVID-19. The board called forward state and local health authorities from the Office of the Governor, local health districts, public health labs, hospitals, and emergency management entities to testify as to how these respective entities would be able to respond to viral spread that occurred at gaming properties. This informational workshop garnered national attention and served as a model for other jurisdictions in the United States. Once June 4th, 2020 was announced as the date that gaming operations could resume, the board's audit and tax and license divisions, led by Chiefs Kelly Colvin and Dan Douglas, reviewed and approved the health and safety plans submitted by all of the board's 458 non-restricted licensees, ensuring that the industry had the mitigation measures in place to protect the public upon reopening. With all reopening plans approved and June 4th upon us, the Enforcement Division, under the direction of Chief James Taylor, implemented a concerted push to inspect all of the board's 2,900 licensees, both non-restricted and restricted, to ensure compliance with the board's health and safety policies. Investigations Chief Mike Labadie and Technology Chief Jim Barbie provided agents to the Enforcement Division to conduct these initial crucial inspections. All 5 of the board's operating divisions sent agents out statewide to make sure the board had eyes on all corners of the state in order to make sure its residents were protected. Since reopening on June 4th, the board has conducted 25,360 health and safety inspections of gaming licensees. Since the initial closure of gaming operations on March 17th, 2020, the board has conducted nearly 93,000 hours of work related solely to responding to the viral pandemic. While I know this is not a money committee, it is important to note that these hours have been fully reimbursed by coronavirus relief funds appropriated by the federal government, and that the board did and continues to do this work without any additional funding or staffing. Under the leadership of Chairman Gibson, the board continues to be a vital part of the statewide pandemic response, with members of the Administration Division participating in or being members of multiple statewide mitigation efforts, including the COVID-19 Mitigation and Management Task Force. Lastly, the board plans on providing vaccination survey information collected from the gaming industry to the state's local health authorities this week in order to correctly order and allocate vaccine doses from the federal government for upcoming priority groups in the state's vaccination playbook. Anyone who works for the board is probably tired of me citing the statutory references that declare the policy of this state to be that the gaming industry is vitally important to both the economy of the state and the general welfare of its residents, and that the board's obligation is to regulate the industry for the protection of the public. While I'm sure that the Nevada Legislature didn't envision a global viral pandemic when it created the Nevada Gaming Control Board and assigned its duties 60 years ago, but the board can't think of a more important way to protect the public and the industry than to shepherd it through these current challenging health and economic times. And with that summary of the board's work, we are happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Morton. I did want to ask you if you could, when you have a moment, forward those slides that you used to our committee manager. We'll make sure that those get up on Nellis for the public to view. I don't think they're up there quite yet. I did want to note before questions that Assemblyman Orrin Licker has joined us some time ago. So, Mr. Secretary, if you could please mark him present, I would appreciate it. Committee, I know that was a lengthy presentation, but I wanted you all to hear about our gaming industry. It's obviously vitally important in our state. We have gaming all the way from Laughlin to Jarbidge at Outside Inn, which if you haven't been up to Jarbidge, I recommend you get up there. I believe it's in Assemblywoman Hanson's district. Fantastic food and a small tavern. They are a restricted gaming licensee, so they have a number of slot machines there. So with all that being said, I know we have a couple members already who have questions, but if anyone could show me by a show of hands on the screen if there are additional questions, I'll make note of that and we'll figure out what order we're going to go in. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please go ahead.
I wanted to just break some news for you to your committee. So we normally, prior to today, we issue a release that talks about the amount of money that was wagered on the Super Bowl. So just now, we just issued a release that showed that our 184 Nevada's 184 sports books, we had a total of a wagering amount of $136.1 million. So that's the handle. That's a significant amount. We had a hold percentage of 9.2%, which is not bad. So in all, a very good night, especially given the fact that we had 25% capacity restrictions and so on. So that's something to be proud of.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Gibson. That was actually on my list of questions. We mentioned that in the Revenue Committee the other day about what those numbers would look like, and best I could tell, flying into Las Vegas on Friday, it seemed like there was a lot of excitement in the air for the big game. So that is good to hear. And I'm not going to reveal which side of that Super Bowl I was on in the interest of confidentiality. So let's see a show of hands again if members have questions. Okay, I think I've got everybody for the moment. So here's the order we're going to go in right now. And if you have additional questions, we can take them. But we'll start with Vice Chair Nguyen, then we're going to go to Assemblywoman Kasama and then Assemblywoman Cohen. So please kick us off, Vice Chair Nguyen.
Thank you for that. Hopefully our chair was contributing to our economic situation here. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Gibson. I know that you have more institutional knowledge than most of us, all of us combined. So, and I also appreciate that you have a very unique perspective, having worked with the Cannabis Compliance Board, as well as obviously the Gaming Control Board. Are you able to kind of give us an idea of how these two large industries and these regulatory boards have been able to kind of navigate some of the unique intricacies of federal and state regulations and federal and state laws? I think about like cannabis conventions at casinos or potential cannabis lounges in casinos. And are these two industries kind of working together collaboratively?
Well, I mean, it's a wonderful question. So thank you, Ms. Nguyen. It's wonderful. It's good to see you again. What I'd say is that, I mean, so it's from the time of Grant Sawyer on, you may recall that there was the Kefauver Commission that, and there was the Bobby Kennedy regime that threatened to come in and essentially take over the gaming industry because of the infiltration of organized crime. And so Grant Sawyer, what Grant Sawyer did was he preempted that move by ensuring that Nevada had the strictest regulatory structure in the world. And so our goal in both cases, in the case with Chairman Yeager as my partner in crime, or my person in the foxhole with me, we brought the Cannabis Compliance Board bill last session in an attempt to create not an overly heavy structure for cannabis. It's a very different industry with margins that are very different, but one that would be seen by the federal government as sufficiently safe and protective that they had no need to intervene. So that's the way that we manage the federal government. We try to do such a good job that they don't want to intervene. That's what I'd say about the state-federal relationship in some of these difficult spaces that we operate in. With regard to cooperation between the industries, they are at a detente, I would say right now. I don't. There's no hostilities. I don't believe there are any attempts by either party to go after the other. As you may recall, last session, the Cannabis Compliance Board bill ultimately included a setback provision for cannabis, and the reason for that was that and there were key people that I don't want to name just for purposes of confidentiality, but they were concerned about what I'd call the $100 billion brick and mortar investment on the Strip, and the way that people coming into Nevada that may not be accustomed to the smell of cannabis might react to the permeation of that smell throughout that brick and mortar structure. So that was the reason for the setback. Now, so they coexist, and they coexist well. I mean, I'm shocked at how well the last 2 years have gone. In many cases, there's been cooperation on the back end, that is investigative resources. Chair Morgan, my dear friend, stole one of the, she borrowed and then permanently employed one of our key special agents who had unique talents and had special relationships with the federal government. So we've been, the Gaming Control Board has been very cooperative with the Cannabis Compliance Board as they've gotten up and running under Tyler Klimas's leadership, and now under Dennis Nylander and former Chief Justice Douglas. So there's lots of cooperation on the regulatory front and within the structure, and the industries themselves coexist, I think, peacefully. There will come a time very soon. Just to go further, I know what you're asking, and I intentionally sort of stopped short because I don't want to predict and be totally wrong. So I am occasionally wrong, or often wrong, as my wife tells me. So what I would say is that with the makeup of the current federal administration and the Congress, I expect that at some point relatively soon there will be changes in scheduling. And so with that, I think that we'll see a lot more cooperation until there's at least some movement on that front. I would encourage gaming licensees to maintain their adherence to law, to the current law, and that is, let's keep these two industries separate for now. Let's not give the federal government any reason to want to come in and to intervene in our activities. That's my guidance.
Thank you for that information. I know that, it's ever changing and it's pretty dynamic right now, but it seems like they should coexist, and there's a lot of opportunity for growth in both of those industries in our state. But thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go next to Assemblywoman Kasama.
Yes, thank you, Assemblywoman Heidi Kasama for District 2. Thank you, Chair Gibson, for that great overview again. So my question, I think, is fairly simple. On your presentation on page 25, where you had selected data and information, under the gaming licenses, and I may have missed it, and you may have said it, there's a non-restricted Group 1 and a non-restricted Group 2. I'm just wondering what the difference is between Group 1 and 2.
It's based in amount. It's based in gross revenue. So that's the only difference. And so, functionally, I don't have the current numbers, the current threshold numbers. They change by CPI. As of 2019, when Ms. Douglas and Morgan made this presentation, it was $6.5 million was the in gross revenue over. It must have been a quarter or maybe a month. It's a limited period of time, but it's a threshold amount, and it was $6.5 million at that point. So anything above would put you in Group 1. Anything below Group 2. And what that means as a practical matter is that the auditing functions are more significant, in depth. The minimum internal control standards are different, more rigorous, more robust. So that's the primary distinction.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go next to Assemblywoman Cohen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for the presentations. My question is on page 29, the taxes and license fee collections. And it's the last paragraph is pursuant to the Nevada Gaming Control Act, the failure to pay such taxes within 30 days will automatically result in the surrender of the gaming license and require immediate closure of the gaming operations. And I just find that paragraph fascinating. So that 30-day time frame seems kind of short, but more than that, can you just address, I don't even know what my question is. Can you just give me some more information about that, or about that time frame, and how compliance is working with that, and what happens if there's a bad month and you need more time? Yeah.
That's a wonderful question, and it's good to see you, Cohen. Yes, it's strictly administered, and the difficulty that we have is that even with COVID, the license becomes void if it's not activated or if fees are not paid, and so or surrendered. And so these are things that we can't get around. We don't have discretion to make any changes in that. I think that, certain licensees have struggled. There's no question about that. But the major ones have been able to make their debt payments. They've gone back to the markets, and they've been able to find additional investors. They've spun off property into REIT structures. And so they've been very good at actually, lightening their overall debt load and finding additional capital to operate. And so they've been making their payments. That has not become a problem for us at all, actually, which is good. I mean, this is, as you know, almost 40% of your general fund. And so I think it's crucial that we do collect all the taxes that we possibly can. Although I'm sympathetic to the difficulty in meeting these requirements under this, under the current conditions as well. I understand that.
And thank you for that. And follow-up, Chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
So thank you, and I appreciate you giving the details about how some of the bigger players are finding the funds and what they're doing to obtain them. But so if we go back to the restricted, small restricted licensee, like in Jarbidge, if they have trouble, is it, find the money, or even if you have, even if you have 10 slots, it's find the money or the license is pulled?
It's a strict requirement, and it would just be the gaming license. It would just be the restricted gaming license that would be remitted or dissolved by operation of law. Now that wouldn't close the entire establishment, and they can come back. We had a situation just recently, I'll just note, that where we had an operator, a well-known operator, who failed to make payment for a variety of reasons, but for a parimutuel operator's license, we'll call it, and that's the terminology that we use for this kind of license. And he was a day late, and we tried to find every possible way to extend the time and do everything we could, but ultimately, under the law and according to our deputy's attorney general, we could not. And so the license was void, just as a matter of law, and that person had to go back to the licensing process. Now the documentation was the same, and we were able to get it on an agenda within a month, or a month and a half roughly, but it was on the February agenda. But that does happen occasionally. But candidly, I haven't seen many surrenders or dissolutions or remittances of licenses from restricted licensees. I know they're struggling, and I'm hopeful that we can get COVID under control soon, and we can have some reopening. But it's not something that the license part of the operations of restricted these taverns, for example, and bars. That's not the part that I've heard is we're not seeing licenses go away in that context.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and before I get to additional questions, I want to admit that I was incorrect on the record as well. I mentioned Jarbidge, and I mentioned it was in Assemblywoman Hanson's district. That's incorrect. It's Assemblyman Ellison's district. It's in Elko County. So if you're in Assemblywoman Hanson's district, you might want to try the Owl Club in Lander County or the Dinky Diner in Esmeralda County. Those are two great spots. So just didn't want to let that stand, that misinformation stand on the record. Do we have additional questions? If I can see any show of hands. I don't see any. Mr. Gibson, I have a question that I'm going to ask you to sort of give a super high level overview on. I've always believed that in this committee, we should probably get continuing legal education credits for the attorneys and those who are watching, because we delve into a lot of legal issues. You touched briefly on the Wire Act, and there's been some action on that. And I just wondered if you could give us just a super quick summary on, sort of what this recent sort of, I guess, questioning and then reinterpretation and then another reinterpretation, what exactly that has meant for Nevada in the world of, I guess, online gaming. And, to the extent you can look into a crystal ball, whether you think we're going to have any issues into the future with the the interpretation of the Wire Act.
Well, thank you for that question, Chairman. That's actually a great question. It's something that, the Wire Act is something I followed for years and something that I have, personal interest in. So, just to back up, so we're talking about the Federal Wire Act of 1961. It was that was a Bobby Kennedy sponsored or package. It was part of a bill package that Bobby Kennedy put forward. There are other parts of that bill package that are still in place today as well. It was the intent of the whole package was to fight organized crime. Now, what they were trying to do there was they were trying to stop the transmission of information used in the placements of better wagers, and there are various clauses to that statutory provision. Now, what happened prior to the reinterpretation was there was muddy water. It was not clear. My sense as a lawyer in the space was that there was hesitancy on the part of licensees to jump into the online full gambling space because they were concerned that there might be some kind of enforcement action by DOJ in particular. And so it wasn't a clear space. Enter the Department of Justice. You had an opinion first from the Office of Legal Counsel that suggested one thing. Then you had a reinterpretation that really expanded what I would call the scope of the Wire Act to apply to anything offered over the wire. And wire communication, telecommunications facilities is a very broad term in federal law, and it definitely includes the internet. So it's not just a physical wire. And with that interpretation, you basically have intrastate operations of, not just sports and sports wagering, but all wagering that's operated over, any kind of wire. It cannot be interstate. That was the reason originally for our compact, our poker compact that you may be familiar with, that we have with some of the eastern seaboard states. Now, with the reinterpretation, it was challenged. It was taken up first by a federal court, and then it was appealed to a circuit court. The circuit court decided that the reinterpretation was incorrect, and that the accurate reading of the Wire Act is to limit the restriction on the placement of better wagers to those that are in the context of sports only. Now, what that will do is limit sports wagering to states, right? So you have state by state regimes for regulating sports wagering, but it will open up other kinds of gambling. So as you know, Chairman Yeager, there have been attempts by this body, the people's body, to pass internet gaming laws, and there have been various iterations that have essentially done the same thing, but we've never been able to get it off the ground. We've had licenses issued, as a matter of fact, but there's been hesitancy to actually operate and function across state lines because of the lack of clarity or opacity of the Wire Act and how it might be interpreted by a Department of Justice, given a certain president or a certain attorney general. At this point, I think it's much clearer than it's ever been. Now, the one item that I would love to see is I'd love to see Merrick Garland, issue a letter saying we're not going to appeal or seek cert from the U.S. Supreme Court. But even absent that, I don't believe he will. This is me predicting. He could, but I don't believe he will. And with that circuit judgment standing, we have significant clarity on the Wire Act as applying to sports alone. And that allows a state like Nevada to have online full casino wagering.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Gibson. I think the Wire Act is a fascinating issue. And of course, Congress could just come in and clean that up for us, but that would be too easy. So we'll just rely on court interpretations in the Department of Justice. But I appreciate that information. So one last call for any other questions that might be out there. Okay, I don't see anyone. Mr. Gibson, Mr. Morton, I want to thank you guys so much for being here, spending about an hour and a half with us on your Tuesday morning. I suspect we're going to see you in the committee at various times throughout the session. I don't think we have a lot of gaming legislation, but we certainly have some. So appreciate the overview and appreciate you being willing to work with us throughout this session. So thanks for being here and have a great rest of your day.
It's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here.
Okay, committee, so we're going to close that agenda item. And I would commend to the committee, I don't know if you had a chance to look, but at the end of the written presentation that was presented, there was good contact information for folks over at the Gaming Control Board, as well as resources. So in that free time that none of us have, if you're interested in reading some other articles about gaming, there's some really good resources there. At this time, I'm going to move on to our next presentation on the agenda, and that is an overview of Clark County and Washoe County offices of the District Attorney. I want to thank Mr. Jones and Ms. Noble for your patience this morning in waiting for your turn, and just let the committee know that both of these individuals are deputy district attorneys. We're going to be seeing a lot of them in the committee as we tackle criminal justice issues this session. And I've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Jones for several years now, and Ms. Noble as well. So they have, likewise, like we've been doing, they have a presentation to give us as well. You can find that on Nellis and follow along, and we'll let them get through the presentation, and then we'll open it up for any questions. So welcome to the committee for the first time, Mr. Jones and Ms. Noble, and please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager, members of the committee. My name is Jon Jones. I'm a Chief Deputy District Attorney in the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I've been with the office almost 15 years now and have served in both the juvenile and criminal divisions of the office. In addition to being a full-time Deputy DA, I also am the legislative liaison for DA Steve Wolfson and the Clark County District Attorney's Office. And as Chairman Yeager indicated, joining me for this presentation is Chief Deputy District Attorney Jennifer Noble. Jennifer is the Chief of the Appellate Unit in the Washoe County District Attorney's Office, and she's been with that office for almost 13 years. She represents District Attorney Hicks and the Washoe County District Attorney's Office. So together, Jenny and I both represent the district attorneys throughout the state of Nevada, which is the District Attorneys Association. And that consists of all 17 elected district attorneys in this state. So this is my 6th session representing the DAs, and it's Jenny's 3rd. And just so you know, you won't always see each of us testifying on various bills. Generally, we only send one representative for DAs. So if you don't see both of us, just know that generally one speaks for the other during the legislative session. So the question we're sort of here today is asked is, what does a district attorney do? There's been a lot of attention recently on district attorneys and the role specifically that prosecutors play in the criminal justice system. And Jenny and I are here today to share with you the ways in which prosecutors in Nevada have been updating their approach to prosecution in recent years. We have been participants in virtually every major piece of criminal justice legislation and criminal justice reform projects that we've seen around the state. Now, that doesn't mean we agree with all of the reform that's taken place, but we have been active participants, and I would suggest that we've earnestly worked towards finding solutions that meet our goal of committing to a more equitable criminal justice system that benefits all of us. I'm reminded of the narrator at the beginning of Law and Order. They talk about the people being represented by two equal yet important groups, that being the police who investigate crimes and the district attorneys who prosecute them. And I'm going to spend a majority of my time today speaking about criminal prosecutions. But just so you know, the offices of the district attorney throughout the state our responsibilities are significant. We handle, in addition to all misdemeanor crimes that occur in a county jurisdiction, so everything but city jurisdiction, which misdemeanors are handled by city attorney's offices. We handle virtually all gross misdemeanor and felony cases that occur in a county, with the few exceptions of cases that the attorney general has jurisdiction of. And I believe their office has presented or will present to you soon. Additionally, we handle juvenile cases, child support matters, child welfare cases in most offices, not all of them handle, but most offices handle child welfare. We provide victim and witness support, and we represent county boards and agencies. Now, I'm not going to touch on some of these responsibilities, but I do know that throughout session, you'll be getting overviews from, for example, on Thursday, you'll be hearing about juvenile justice, and on Friday, you'll be hearing about child support. And if after hearing those presentations, you have specific questions about the DA's role in either of those systems, feel free to reach out to Jenny or myself, and we'll do our best to answer your question. So as I sort of alluded to, there are 17 elected district attorneys in the state of Nevada. There's one for every county in our state, and the office sizes vary drastically. In some offices, there's only one attorney, and that's the elected district attorney. Whereas in Clark County, we're one of the largest prosecuting agencies in the nation. And it's something that I think Jenny and I will be reminding you of as we go through session, that what works in Clark and what works in Washoe may not work in some of these rural jurisdictions. So we have to be mindful of that when we're making legislation that will impact all of these counties. Specifically, when talking about the Clark County District Attorney's Office, we have 5 major divisions. The first of which is our administrative division, which constitutes basically the things that make our office work. But specifically, it houses our Victim Witness Center. And Jenny's going to talk to you a little bit more about victim services that we provide, and that's handled through the Clark County District Office's administrative division specifically. We have 4 other divisions, including our civil division, which is led by Mary Ann Miller. She is the county counsel for Clark County, and she provides legal advice to the county commissioners and agencies within Clark County. The juvenile division is led by Bridget Duffy. Many of you have worked with Bridget on various issues, and she will be a regular presence at the legislature working on bills that affect children in Clark County. The juvenile division in our office contains both the juvenile delinquency division and the child welfare division. So both of those are supervised by Bridget Duffy. We also have a family support division. And family support is surprising for some people to know that that's the largest division in the Clark County DA's office in terms of number of employees. In total, my office has about 175 attorneys. That's approximate because at any given time vacancies could reduce that number. About 125 of those attorneys are in the criminal division. Around 30 are in our juvenile division, and the remainder are spread throughout civil and child support. Again, I am going to focus on, and Jenny's going to focus on the criminal aspect of our jobs. But if you ever have any questions, again, feel free to ask us, and we'll be happy to provide you with answers regarding our other divisions, because they all do equally important and great work. This is the breakdown of the Clark County District Attorney's Office Criminal Division. We have 2 assistant district attorneys under the leadership of District Attorney Wolfson, and they both supervise various specialty units in our office. Some prosecutions require a special skill set or knowledge base, so we assign prosecutors to handle solely those types of cases. Some examples are homicides, gun crimes. Those are generally robberies, robbery sprees that involve firearms. Special Victims Unit, which is a special unit that prosecutes sexual assault cases or cases where children are the victim of a sexual assault or physical abuse. We also have a gang unit that prosecutes gang offenders, and our HIDA, high intensity drug trafficking area. It's a collaboration between federal, state, and local prosecutors and law enforcement, and we have a specialized unit that handles those drug trafficking cases within our office. Finally, I want to point out our financial crimes and elder abuse unit. This is a specialized unit DA Wolfson started a couple years back due to our significant elder abuse cases and major fraud cases that we have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny, who will talk to you about an overview of the Washoe County's office.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. So the Washoe County District Attorney's Office is about, in terms of attorneys, about half the size of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. We have 68, I think, current attorneys. And of course, we are led by District Attorney Hicks. Our Assistant District Attorney in the Criminal Division is Zach Young. And our Civil Assistant District Attorney is David Watts-Vial. Our structure is a little bit different. We have 3 general felony teams. We have a misdemeanor team, traffic team, and we have a team dedicated only to specialty court programs. We've got a major violators unit, juvenile team, and then we also have a team that works only at our CAC, which is a Child Advocacy Center. So we have 3 prosecutors dedicated to that facility. We have the Appellate Division, of course, which I head up at this time, and we also have our Conviction Integrity Committee. We've got investigation divisions, Victim Witness Assistance Center. That's all similar to Clark, but as you can see, oh, I see there's a question about contact info. Of course, I will provide that. So anyway, we have basically the same types of services, but our layout's just a little bit different. Next slide, please. So in doing our jobs, we're trying to focus on what we call the 3 Ps, which is protecting victims, prosecuting our cases to the best of our ability, and promoting justice in our community. And that doesn't always mean putting someone in prison for a long time or always arguing for jail. As we'll talk about later on, DAs are working with our specialty courts and our judges and defense attorneys to find other solutions to folks who come into contact with the criminal justice system because they have a mental health issue, because they have struggles with substance abuse or other issues in their life. And we'll talk a little bit more about that now in a little bit. Next slide, please. So one big part of what we do are victim services, and we could not do that without our community partners. We also make sure that we're not only protecting the defendant's constitutional rights, which we are obligated to do, but also the victim's constitutional rights. It can be very difficult for victims during the pendency of a criminal case because the speed of the system the speed at which the system moves is focused on the defendant's rights. And so we also try to provide our victims some support through that process. Next slide, please. So when people are coming from a place of trauma, our victims often don't even want to talk about what happened to them, let alone testify in front of a court, in front of a preliminary hearing judge, in front of a jury. And so our advocates are trained to help them understand the system, go with them to court, help them be notified about what's going on, help them understand the process. And also importantly, we're directing these victims to community resources because as an office, we may not individually have things to assist the victims with, but by networking with our community resources, we can help provide those wraparound services that a victim might need. Next slide. So here are some of our community partners. We have Victims of Crime, Safe Nest, Safe Embrace, Rape Crisis Center. We have legal aid centers that we work with. Here in Northern Nevada, we have the Children's Cabinet and the Housing Authority. So any one of these agencies could come into play in a particular case. I'll give you the example of a domestic violence case. We may have a victim of domestic violence who doesn't feel safe in their home anymore. They share their home with the perpetrator. And so they may need to move. And in order to move, they may need to break their lease. So we might reach out to legal aid services or legal aid centers for them to help assist them in breaking that lease. We may get counseling for them through Victims of Crime. We may have issues in terms of moving costs that victims of crime can help with. And then their children may need counseling. So we can reach out to the Children's Cabinet and other entities who can assist in providing services that our office doesn't necessarily provide, but that are critical to their ability to move on with their lives and stay as focused as they can and at getting past this hard point in their life. Child advocacy centers. So we have these in Clark County and in Washoe County, and there are other child advocacy centers in the state. In Washoe County, we're very proud of our child advocacy center. It was established in 2014. We have 3 dedicated prosecutors who work just at the child advocacy center, and they're part of a multidisciplinary team. So in addition to prosecutors, we have trained forensic interviewers. We have medical professionals, therapists, and advocates all in one place. And the whole point of this is to reduce trauma to the child by putting them in a child-centered environment. And instead of doing what used to happen, which was the child might have to disclose to a teacher or perhaps a clergy member or anyone, and then they'd have to talk to the police, and then they'd have to talk to the prosecutor, and then they'd have to talk to a doctor or nurse. We try to minimize the number of times the child has to disclose. And so we have members of our team who can watch the interview conducted according to best practices by our forensic interviewers. And this has really helped in terms of the success of our prosecutions of people who sexually abuse children or physically abuse children. And it's also helped in making sure that we get the most accurate information from the child without overly traumatizing them. So we're very proud of that facility. Next slide. Now, of course, I'm sure you're all aware of Marsy's law, which was passed in November of 2018. This grants victims of crime specific constitutional rights under our state constitution. Now, while the rights are primarily focused on a victim's right to be safe, they're also having the right to be informed and to be heard during the criminal justice process. And I note that this means that they have the right to be present and to be heard at any hearing involving release of the defendant. So that would include bail hearings, the right to be at a post-conviction hearing, a parole hearing, hearings involving release. And so it requires not just prosecutors, but our entire criminal justice system to recognize these rights and to make sure that they're protected during the pendency of a criminal case. Next slide.
So the second of the 3 Ps is what we call prosecuting the case. And this is really the nuts and bolts of a DA's job. Our office picks up a case basically where when law enforcement submits it to our agency. And the larger agencies within Nevada have attorneys whose sole job it is to screen cases. And in Clark County, I can tell you that we have 7 deputies who screen cases. They review the cases for charges. And we put seasoned trial attorneys in this position because they are best positioned to answer the question, can we ultimately prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt? And there are many factors that go into a charging decision. We review for proof, search or constitutional issues, or any issue that would affect our ability to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I know there's allegations from some that we're basically too cozy with police departments, but I can tell you that we engage in a completely independent review of the case when it's referred to us by a police agency. And I think that's reflected in the statistics from our office. Last year, in 2020, the complete year, we received 34,836 felony or gross misdemeanor cases to our office. We approved 68% of those cases. So a large majority are approved, but a significant percentage are either denied or at least pending prosecution, depending on whether or not we can get some additional information from law enforcement. The numbers for misdemeanors are lower. I can tell you that last year, we have an approval rate of about 50% for misdemeanors. Now, some of that is due to COVID, and so they have changed drastically. But even in the past, our approval for misdos has been about 80%. So still, I can reiterate the fact that we deny almost 1/5 of all cases that are referred to us for prosecution for one reason or another. And that's not an indictment of law enforcement at all, but our decision whether or not to proceed to a prosecution is different than the question that law enforcement is asking with respect to whether or not they should effectuate an arrest or submit a case to our office. Their question is probable cause? Is there slight or marginal evidence that a defendant has committed a crime? But when we review a case, we ask ourselves, can we prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt? I want to, by way of example, give you two crimes that we have in Nevada. The first is home invasion, and the second is residential burglary, which was tweaked a little bit during the 2019 session. But you can see the elements on the screen. So whether or not we charge one or both of these is obviously fact specific. One has an intent element, the other doesn't. One has a force element, the other doesn't. So if a person kicks in my door and enters my home, then we would charge home invasion. But if they entered my home by just opening the door because I forgot to lock it, but they entered with an intent to steal, then we could charge burglary in that case. And generally, we can show intent by the actions of the defendant. What did they do when they entered? Did they leave with anything? So those are the types of things that we look at with respect to whether or not we can prove intent. So if we decide, we being the DAs, are going to file charges, we filed what's called a criminal complaint. And here's an example of a criminal complaint charging invasion of the home. And we list the defendant's name. We also list the essential elements of the crime, including the date it was committed, the address, and any specific actions that we're alleging as well. This document, the complaint, is filed in justice court. Virtually all, but not all, of our cases start in justice court. And again, we're not really getting into criminal procedure today, just generally some of the actions behind what our offices do. But if you have any questions about specific criminal procedure, again, feel free to reach out to Jenny or myself. So basically, concurrent to the charging decision, when a defendant has been arrested by a law enforcement agency, we're engaging in what's called a Valdez Jimenez hearing. Now, this is a new structure since you last met. In 2019, the Valdez Jimenez decision had not been decided by the Supreme Court. But since then, the Nevada Supreme Court has found that defendants are entitled to a prompt, individualized bail determination, and that if prosecutors are going to ask for bail in an amount more than the defendant can afford, we must prove by clear and convincing evidence that no least restrictive conditions would ensure the defendant's appearance or protect the community. And in addition to that, the court is considering what we call statutory or constitutional factors as well, specifically the victim and some of the things that you see listed here on the right side of your screen. I will say that predating Valdez Jimenez in Las Vegas Justice Court, we've worked on what we call the initial appearance court for a few years now. And the goal of the initial appearance court was to get defendants into court within 12 hours of their arrest. Now, while we're still trying to reach the 12-hour goal, it can be as low as 12. Generally, within 12 to 24 hours of arrest, a defendant in Las Vegas Justice Court is in front of a judge. And it's been that way for a couple years now. And kind of hitting what Jenny alluded to earlier, 12 to 24 hours from arrest, we also have to notify the victim of this potential court hearing. So if they want to participate in the Valdez Jimenez hearing, they can. Some other options that judges have in lieu of bail are house arrest, where a defendant would wear a GPS monitor, intensive supervision, which is what we call in Clark County, but it's really just telephonic or in-person check-ins at a designated period interval. They can also just straight OR a defendant with release conditions such as stay away from the victim or stay away from certain addresses. One thing I want to talk about with respect to Valdez Jimenez, because you will be hearing some legislative changes surrounding the Valdez Jimenez changes this session, is time to make an informed decision. As prosecutors, we are moving up the period of time in which we're making decisions, but sometimes we don't have all the information that we need. And sometimes that information bears directly on a defendant's dangerousness to the community or their likelihood to appear. So sometimes we need to ask for short continuances to keep doing some investigation. And we are going to ask this session for some built-in continuances for Valdez Jimenez. And basically, as soon as we file a criminal complaint and as soon as defendant is either given an attorney or hires an attorney, we're beginning the negotiation process. And plea negotiations can occur at any time throughout the process, but generally they occur right before a preliminary hearing. And we look at many factors when we're talking about negotiating a case and how we're going to negotiate a case. The seriousness of the offense, our ability to prove it, the details in the officer's report, the defendant's criminal history. So you could have two defendants engaging in similar conduct, but the outcomes could be vastly different based on a whole number of things, including the defendant's record. And sometimes there's other issues that bear out in a case that aren't necessarily reflected in the declaration of arrest. And so I just want to point that out to you, that it's important to look at all the layers of a case. So not just the act, but the defendant's history and the other facets that DAs look at. Cases that are seemingly the same are often not. And I also want to point out that as part of the negotiation process, we generally we consult with the victims and police officers to get their input on the case as well. I want to point out that most cases negotiate. Again, we file a significant number of cases a year, but only around 130 to 170 go to jury trial on any given year. Now, last year, because of COVID, it was an anomaly. We didn't do very many trials at all. But I think in an average year over the past few years, we've averaged anywhere from 130 to 170 cases. Jenny?
Thank you. So, of course, we have put a lot of work into preparing for trial, but one of the most important things that we need to make sure we do is provide the evidence to the defense. In other words, anything that we plan on using during trial must be provided to the defense attorney in a time frame that they can be able to look at it and analyze it and prepare their defense. Our constitutional discovery obligations are critical, and we also have statutorily based discovery obligations to turn over this evidence. Now, we have on here that we have to provide both exculpatory and impeachment evidence to the defense. And most of you may know what that means, but exculpatory means anything tending to explain away the charge. For example, if we find evidence suggesting that the defendant was at a different location at the time of the crime, that would be something that we need to turn over to the defense immediately. Impeachment information might be information suggesting that a witness has said something inconsistent with what they've reported to the police or to us. All of that evidence must be provided to the defense, and it's critical in terms of complying with our constitutional discovery obligations under Brady and Giglio. We also issue subpoenas and contact witnesses. The defense also can issue subpoenas anticipation for trial and call the witnesses that they want to call. We'll file motions to address discovery issues or whether or not pieces of evidence should be admitted. And during the pendency of a criminal case, we may also ask the police to conduct additional investigation. And as we receive that information, of course, we provide it to the defense. Next slide, please. So at trial, of course, the defendant has a right to trial before 12 jurors, a jury of their peers. And those jurors are the only ones who make the factual determinations regarding the defendant's guilt or innocence. We have to prove each of those crimes beyond a reasonable doubt, and that decision has to be unanimous. Next slide. Now, what's reasonable doubt? Prosecutors have gotten in trouble in the past in trying to quantify this. And so what we really try to stay away from and what we encourage our deputies to do is go with this statutory definition, which is in front of you. A reasonable doubt is a doubt that is based on reason, not mere possible doubt, but the type of doubt that would govern or control your decisions in more weighty affairs of life. So that is a definition that we do not stray from, and that's what the jurors must apply. Next slide. After we have either a guilty plea or we have a jury convict somebody of a crime, we move on to the sentencing phase, which starts 60 to 120 days approximately after the plea or the guilty verdict. In anticipation of that, the Division of Parole and Probation will prepare a pre-sentence investigation report. That report will have information concerning the crime, the defendant's criminal history, anything that the defendant may have said during their interview, It also provide personal information regarding perhaps their struggles with mental health issues, substance abuse, etc. And so these are all important pieces of information that the judge needs to consider when they're deciding what the appropriate sentence is. They have broad discretion to fashion a sentence as long as it's within statutory limits. So we may have the prosecutor argue for an appropriate sentence. The defense attorney obviously will advocate on behalf of their client and ask for a sentence or a resolution they think is fair. And then the victim has a right as well to speak at sentencing. And importantly, the defendant can also address the court, speak in allocution, and explain why they're asking for the sentence that they're asking for. Next slide, please. After trial and sentencing, I think a lot of people have the impression that the criminal justice system is done. That is certainly not the case. And what I spend the bulk of my time doing are working on post-conviction proceedings, such as direct appeals. Those are to our Nevada appellate courts, so the Nevada Court of Appeals or the Nevada Supreme Court. That's the first appeal that somebody has from their trial result or their plea result. And they have 30 days to file their notice of appeal after they're convicted. We also have it can sometimes be a parallel proceeding called a petition for writ of habeas corpus. Those are filed in the district court, and that's usually where a defendant is going to challenge the adequacy of their attorney's performance. That's typically the types of claims that we see. Those have to be filed within 1 year generally of the remitter or a final decision in the case by the Nevada appellate courts. There can be exceptions, though, depending on why the defendant has delayed filing their petition for writ of habeas corpus. They may be entitled to a hearing on that petition, and then the results of that evidentiary hearing and the court's decision are also subject to an appeal to our Nevada appellate courts. Defendants can also file other types of procedural vehicles to challenge their conviction. They can file a motion for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence. They can file a motion for new trial based on some sort of legal error that they believe occurred during the proceedings. A request for DNA testing can be filed at any time after the conviction. A motion to withdraw a guilty plea can happen either prior to sentencing or after sentencing. And prior to the plea or after the plea. And we also have petitions to establish factual innocence. That was something that was created by the legislature last session. And that's also based on newly discovered evidence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be scientific. So these can be filed at any time. It could be filed 30 years after the conviction. There is no time limit on these types of proceedings. Now, I'll note that while I think it's really important that we have these vehicles for defendants to challenge their convictions, because we certainly want to make sure that we have the right person incarcerated for the crime. This is really, really hard on the victims, particularly in our murder cases. We have victims who are still, of course, very invested in the outcome of the cases, who attend each one of these hearings. And so for them, the case really just drags on and on for decades, which is very difficult on the families of the decedents. Next slide, please.
So this is Jon Jones again. I spoke earlier about how prosecutors are updating their practices. And one of the major ways is focusing on how to stop the quote cycle of offending. And what I mean by that is getting at the reasons why people break the law, be it substance abuse, mental health, or any other triggers. Now, there's still, and it is a punitive aspect to the criminal justice system. And prison is still an important tool to rid our society of those who prey on people. But DAs are focusing more on treatment, and that's why we come to ask you for options. We need more options for those who have substance abuse and mental health treatment. One of the promises last session with the passage of AB 236 was to use the savings from a reduced prison population and to reinvest those dollars in programs. And we are looking forward to that part of AB 236, because I can unequivocally say that the need for drug and mental health services is great. So I want to talk to you about a few diversion programs that we have and that district attorneys use. But I want to start off by a Clark County specific project that Steve Wolfson started last year. It's called Project Redirect. And in Project Redirect, defendants are identified during the case assessment process. So that's by those screening deputies that I talked about earlier. And if they've committed a nonviolent felony and are otherwise appropriate, we basically don't file any charges. We enter into an agreement with them where they agree to pay any restitution. They enter a program of rehabilitation depending on what the needs are of that particular defendant. And if they are successful, we deny the charge and they can seal their records. If they fail to complete the program or commit another crime while they're participating, the charges will be filed and the case will proceed as normal. So this is one example of how in Clark County we're updating our practices to engage in, I would say, non-traditional, but increasingly visible diversion programs. Additionally, last session in statute, AB 236, you added 176-211. That was a newer diversion scheme. And we also have 3363 that's already in statute, which is a treatment for drug offenders, which we use in our DA's offices. Additionally, I wrote in here diversion in negotiations. Even though there may not be a statutory scheme, district attorneys oftentimes offer negotiations in which a defendant can earn a dismissal if they successfully complete, or earn a drop down to a lesser charge if they successfully complete. So these are just some options that prosecutors have to engage what I call diversion. That is ultimately have people end up without a criminal record.
So our specialty courts are something that we're very proud of in Washoe County, and I know that Clark County also has a number of programs. For example, both counties, I believe, have drug courts. And before we start talking about drug court, I want to explain that these courts are a different landscape for an offender. So we have, instead of an adversarial atmosphere, more of a team atmosphere with most of our diversion courts. Participating professionals like the DA, defense attorneys, treatment providers, and the Division of Parole and Probation work together to maximize the opportunity for them to work with the defendant as a team. And up here in Washoe County, our specialty court team usually in each of the specialty court meets with the rest of the staff about once a week, and they're able to go over what's going on with each defendant, how they're progressing, maybe they backslid, and they're certainly not looking for perfection. We understand that when someone is struggling with substance abuse, they're struggling with mental health issues or other issues, that they are going to have points where their compliance is less than perfect. What we're looking for is an effort to comply with the program, to work with the treatment providers, and it's certainly one of the things that I think is better about the criminal justice process now versus 10 years ago. So one of these is drug court. We have services for folks who are struggling with drug addiction, treatment providers, housing assistance, employment assistance, mental health care, and other types of practical assistance like helping people find jobs. Now, in drug court in Washoe County, we separate our participants into different documents based on risk. And that's because based on some of the changes last session, we may have people with sales-related offenses where they're selling fairly high quantities of drugs. And then we have people who you can really tell their primary situation is that they are a user and they're an addict and they need a specific type of help. So we're trying to keep the folks who are selling separate from the folks who are simply just using. Mental health court is also one of the courts we have. Again, we're focusing on why do they have contact with the criminal justice system? What's going on with their mental illness or their condition? And the team works with them, with their treatment providers, to help them succeed in the process. Sometimes that involves medications, sometimes it doesn't, to assist them with finding a job. Some things as simple as getting a driver's license or getting identification that could be a challenge for people struggling with mental health concerns. We try to assist them with that. So we have a lot of wraparound services associated with that court. Next slide, please. We also in Clark and Washoe County have a veterans treatment court, which we're very proud of. This focuses on rehabilitating folks who have served our country and have come into contact with the criminal justice system because they have service-related conditions. They may have a brain injury, they may have military sexual trauma, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression. And we serve in the Washoe County DA's office, not just folks from Washoe County, but throughout Northern Nevada. So if someone is from Story County or they are from Winnemucca, Elko County, if they want to, they can come to our court if they're referred by a judge and take advantage of the services of that court. We have drug addiction treatment, mental health treatment, psychiatric services, and just practical services that we offer, such as job placement, etc. We also have a very cool program where we have veterans mentoring veterans. And so a participant in Veterans Court may be assigned a mentor who's been through combat, who's been through some of the challenges that they've been in their lives, and is there to cheer them on and help them. And the program usually lasts about 12 to 18 months. Next slide. We also in Washoe County have something called Prison Reentry Court. Now, these are folks who are still serving their sentence of imprisonment, but they're referred to us by the Nevada Department of Corrections based on a great disciplinary record, achievement records in prison. And the prosecutor, defense counsel, the judge, and the division all vote regarding who should be included in this program. And for prisoners who are re-entering our society, they're helped with transitional housing, substance abuse counseling if they need it, mental health counseling if they need it. And so we really try to give them the best chance to re-enter society in a successful way. They have to participate for at least 1 year or until they would normally be paroled. Additionally, we do have something that is not on this slide, but I want to mention in Washoe County, which is our medically assisted treatment court. This is a court that's focused on offenders who have specific addiction to opiates. So we may have folks assist them with their opiate-full offenders in that court. So work very hard as a team with defense attorneys, with the staff, with the court administrator to make sure that we offer the best services and the best outcomes for those folks. We have a DUI court, and that court is a little bit more strict. It's pursuant to Senate Bill 277 from quite a few sessions ago now. But these are folks that have committed driving under the influence 3 times within 7 years. And so normally they would have a felony in prison. In this court, they are offered the opportunity to comply with some pretty strict standards, including requiring them to wear a scram device, an interlock device on their car. They're given substance abuse counseling, etc. But the upshot is that if they successfully complete this program, their felony will be converted to a misdemeanor. And so that's a really important result for them. And I also wanted to mention in Clark County, they have a gambler's court. I know we have something like that in some of our justice courts, but it's not quite as well established as Clark County's. And then we also have misdemeanor specialty courts. Our Reno Justice Court and Sparks Justice Court have a number of different dockets where they are trying to help folks convicted of misdemeanors who have some of the same issues that I've mentioned in these other district court specialty programs. Next slide, please.
And this is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County DA's office. And I also want to reiterate that we are developing programs that are not just for what we would call entry-level offenders. In Clark County, again, under the direction of DA Steve Wolfson, we have partnered with the Hope for Prisoners program and developed a program we're calling Hope for Second Chances. This program targets high-risk individuals who are legitimate candidates for a prison sentence. And what we do is we partner with Hope for Prisoners, and they utilize their program services to provide support, mentorship, and training for the people. And they do this in conjunction with parole and probation. So typically what will happen is they will, instead of getting a prison sentence, they'll get a suspended sentence and be placed on probation and attend and complete the Hope for Second Chances program. Any of you who are not aware of the Hope for Prisoners program generally, I highly encourage you to take the opportunity to get to know that program. It was started by John Ponder, and it is an amazing program, and it's doing great things for our community. And although I'm not spending a lot of time today talking about juveniles, I want to sing the praises of the Harbor. And the Harbor is a juvenile assessment center. And Bridget Duffy from our office, who again runs our Juvenile Division, has spent years with other agencies in Clark County getting this off the ground. It's an assessment center where you basically quite a few community providers are located in this one-stop shop. And you don't have to be in the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system to avail yourself of services at the Harbor. So if you have families that are in crisis, they can go to the Harbor and try to address any needs that they have. There's an assessment process, and then referrals go out to various agencies that can best assist depending on what the needs of the children are that are seeking services.
I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what processes we go through and what each office recognizes as an important interest in making sure that claims of actual innocence or cases where the wrong person may have been convicted are taken very seriously. In Washoe County, we have something that's called the Conviction Integrity Committee. And in Clark County, similarly, we have the Conviction Integrity Unit. And so both counties have dedicated personnel to review claims from prisoners indicating that they are wrongfully imprisoned and suggesting that they have evidence to show us that would in fact prove their innocence. And if we find these credible claims, we have the option to take appropriate action, including stipulating to excuse the procedural time bars to make it easier to get this into court, agreeing to additional testing, examining newly discovered evidence, or we could even agree to dismiss the case. So that is an important part of each of our offices. Next slide. We also have set up the Nevada Prosecution Best Practices Committee. This is a group of nonpartisan prosecutors from across the state. There are 12 of them, and they represent law enforcement and prosecutory interest in making sure that what we're doing is the best way to approach a problem. So when issues come up in the urban areas, in the suburban areas, rural, this is something that we would bring before the Best Practices Committee so that they can look at what DA's offices around to help continue to improve our practice of law. Next slide. So in conclusion, I want to assure this committee that we are always mindful that it is not our job to get a number of convictions. It's our job to make sure that justice is done. This is not law and order where you see prosecutors at times that are simply just interested in the convictions and they don't even care who actually committed a crime. That is not what we do. We want a just outcome for the victim. We want an outcome that works for the community, and we want to make sure that justice is done. And with that, I thank you so much for your time, and we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jones and Ms. Noble. And, as I mentioned previously before you gave your presentation, there are going to be frequent participants in our committee here in Assembly Judiciary. And so members, please reach out if you're working on criminal justice issues. They'll be able to give you an on-the-ground perspective of what is going on. And I know there are members on this committee that don't have any experience in criminal justice related issues, and certainly appreciate that. It's a lot to take in the presentation today, but if you do have additional questions just about process and that, you can feel free to reach out to these two, or you have a number of folks on the committee who have practiced criminal law as well, including myself, Vice Chair Wynn. I believe Assemblywoman Cohen has done some criminal defense work as well. and I'm probably missing somebody else, but regardless, feel free to ask questions. For now, I know I have some questions in the queue already, but let me just take a show of hands. Who else has a question for our prosecutors? Okay, so far we'll go in this order. We'll start with Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, then we'll go to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, Assemblywoman Hanson, and Assemblywoman Hardy, and we'll take any more questions after that. So Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, do you want to kick us off with questions?
Sure. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the presentation. My question's about case screening that you spoke about early on. You know, we've seen study after study that confirms that implicit racial bias has an effect on our criminal justice system. So, well, first, let me ask you, do you believe that implicit racial bias exists in the system before I move on from that?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, this is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County DA's office. Thank you for asking that question. And I believe the Nevada Youth Legislature actually has a bill this session where they're proposing to mandate training on implicit bias for members of the prosecution and other teams in law enforcement. And I can assure you that we do believe in the issue. And in fact, we've received training in the Clark County DA's office on the issue and understanding implicit bias.
Follow-up, Chair, if I may. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button, so please go ahead.
Sorry about that. Okay, so that's great, and I look forward to seeing the Youth Legislature's bill come. But I was actually thinking of, I just recently heard about the San Francisco DA. They have a blind charging decision. I think it's a software. Do you think that might help mitigate implicit racial bias? I feel like if we just go in where it's completely blind and we can't see, that might even push us even further, because I think that we're all struggling with the fact that we have these bias that some of us didn't even realize that we had. So I was just wondering what you thought about that.
This is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I actually have not heard of that program. So I'll try to look at the program, and then I'll circle back to you with any thoughts that I may have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, and sorry, committee members. My computer's being a little finicky this morning. I'm sure we've all dealt with this on a regular basis, but we'll go next to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Good morning, Chandra Summers Armstrong, Assembly District 6. Thank you so much to both of you for being here and providing all this wonderful information. Mr. Jones and also Ms. Noble, I would like to know if you have seen any issues with instituting the Jimenez structure and Marsy's law. I worked on some bail reform back in 2018 with some community groups, and just would like to know if this has presented a problem, or are you able to institute Jimenez effectively?
This is Jennifer Noble on behalf of the Washoe County District Attorney's Office. The question, Assemblywoman, I can say that we have been doing our best to comply with the timeframes imposed by Valdez Jimenez. At times, we don't have all the information necessary. So if the hearing is held in 12 hours, we may not have the criminal history. We may not have information about the offense that's important for the judge to make an informed decision. And this really does tie into Marsy's law, because as you know, victims have a constitutional right to be heard and to be present at anything involving release. And there's sort of been an assumption, I think, by some of our judiciary and defense and other parties of the criminal justice system, that the burden with contacting the victim, making sure they're there, making sure they know what's going on, is something that the prosecutors bear alone. And that's simply not what the constitutional amendment says. In fact, it says it doesn't change anything about the burdens of a prosecutor. And so what we'd really like to see, and what I'd like to see, is what they've done in some other states, where the courts have a centralized system so that the victims can be given a URL or website at the time of the crime, so that they can log in and see what's going on with their case. Because, and a lot of courts have those systems on their websites. That's something that would help a lot, because right now we are trying to keep up with letting the victims know what's going on as best we can with text notifications, et cetera. But sometimes it's just not enough time for them to be able to get there when it's really important to them to be heard. So that's one issue that we are seeing.
And Assemblywoman, this is a Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County DA's office. I want to piggyback off of Jenny's comments a little bit as well. We are still implementing the Valdez Jimenez decision. We're still working through some issues with implementation, including the timeframe issues that Jenny just talked about. But there are some inequities within the bail system that Valdez Jimenez did not address. And one of those issues is standard bail. We still have standard bail in the state of Nevada. So somebody who is of means can bail out before ever seeing a judge. And that person is somebody potentially that I would argue needs to remain detained because of their criminal history or because of the violent nature of the conduct they're alleged to have committed. So as DAs, one of the additional aspects of bail reform we're asking for is an end to standard bail. So if, unless you're subject to a generally applicable release order, for example, in Clark County, virtually everyone who is arrested for a possession of controlled substance charge is released. Unless that order applies to you, you should see a judge before any type of standard bail is set.
Thank you, Ms. Noble and Mr. Jones. Chair, if I may ask a follow-up.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. When you don't have the information, well, Ms. Noble, you spoke to a standard repository for victims. Can you speak a little bit more about what you mean there? And if you don't have the information within the 12 hours, what do you do?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. I think typically what our prosecutors do is they ask for a bit more time so that they can get that information. And also I note that sometimes the defense attorneys are asking for more time because they haven't had a chance to look at the criminal history yet. Sometimes we don't receive that directly from the agency. And so, and we're not allowed to send those via email to the defense, right? There are restrictions that the FBI places on those. So, or on the dissemination of that information. So we have them available for pickup, but sometimes the defense attorney hasn't had a chance to take a look at it either. And so we'll ask for, another day or 12 more hours or whatever is necessary. We really try to minimize how much more time that we ask for. And sometimes our request is granted and sometimes it's denied.
Great, thank you. And just to mention to the committee, as by way of history, Mr. Jones mentioned the push to get rid of standard bail before a defendant sees a judge. We did pass such a bill, Assembly Bill 136, in the 2017 session, sponsored by Assemblywoman Neal. Now, it had other things in there as well, but ultimately that bill was vetoed by Governor Sandoval. So here we are in 2021, and we're still talking about the same things, but hopefully we'll be able to make that happen. And I think the court's decision certainly provided some clarity for litigants on those particular issues. Okay, I'm going to go next to Assemblywoman Hanson, who I believe has a couple of questions. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and it's nice to see you, Ms. Noble and Mr. Jones. Actually, my question springboards a little bit off of my colleague, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Regarding that detention bail, Valdez Jimenez, situation. Has COVID caused you any delays that have impacted trying to make sure that defendants are given some of these rights to happen sooner rather than later?
Assemblywoman Hanson, this is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. Our initial appearance court has still met twice a day, every day of the week, even during COVID. In fact, I don't know if initial appearance court ever went virtual. I think they were still meeting in person, although I think the inmates appeared virtually during that time. But yes, during COVID, the Valdez Jimenez hearings still happened. They still happened within the 12 to 24 hours that I talked about. We have had other aspects of the criminal justice system slow down drastically, including the fact that no trials were taking place. But the initial detention determination is one that we still tried to adhere to based on the Supreme Court's ruling that it must be held promptly.
Great. And just also on that, with Marsy's law, with having to contact the victim or notify the victim, do you just have to attempt to notify? Are you going to be delayed in this process if you don't get some sort of recognition that the victim has received notification? Does that cause a delay in this?
This is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. We attempt to call them, yes. I mean, if it's a very serious case and we know for one reason or another that the victim wants to be heard at the Valdez Jimenez hearing, we'll ask for a continuance. But again, there's no continuance mechanism built into statute, so we're at the mercy of the judge in that particular situation. So that's one of the reasons why we're asking for a continuance continuance provision built in statute, so we can ask for it and point to when we're making that request.
Great. And Chair, I promise this is just a real quick answer question.
That's fine. Go ahead.
This is more like 3 questions. On your last part of the presentation talked about the Conviction Integrity Review and the Nevada Prosecution Best Practices Committee. When were those established? What year?
This is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. That's a great question. The Conviction Integrity Unit in Clark County was started a couple years ago. I want to say it's been a couple years, 3 years maybe, but I don't want to just guess, so I apologize, but it's been a couple years. The Best Practices Committee has been around for about a year. And our Assistant District Attorney, Christopher Lawley, and another Deputy District Attorney in my office, Nell Christensen, have really worked to put together that committee so that we're really dealing with issues as they arise. I mean, as the legislative liaison for the offices, Jenny and I receive all kinds of questions and concerns about the goings on in our offices. And the Best Practices Committee is a great way for prosecutors of all stripes throughout the state to get together and to talk about those issues and look at what other jurisdictions have done when they've confronted these same issues. Because we're not unique here in Nevada in terms of some of the criminal justice issues that we're seeing. And instead of reinventing the wheel, we're looking around the country and looking around the state to see if there's any answers to the questions that are before us.
Jennifer Noble, for the record. Assemblywoman Hanson, just to answer your question with regard to Washoe County, our Conviction Integrity Committee was established in 2017.
Okay, I'm going to go next to Assemblywoman Hardy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for this presentation. As one that does not work in criminal law, this has been very informative for me. So I just have 2 questions, and this can be a general answer. So because of COVID, you know, the courts were shut down in some way or another. How far behind, like, are the calendars of the cases now, just generally?
Assemblywoman Hardy, that is a great question. And it's actually one of the questions that Best Practices has been asked to address. And that's how to deal with the backlog that was created because of COVID. We do have a backlog. How big that is, I don't know at this point. I can tell you we have done things to try to mitigate the backlog. And I kind of addressed this during my presentation when I said that we've sort of tightened up our screening procedures and our case assessment unit. So in all honesty, a case that may have been approved a year or two ago might not have been approved during COVID, as we have to focus our resources on the cases that we really should be focusing on due to a public safety concern. And so those are the things that we're trying to do to address the backlog, or at least to keep the backlog from growing any bigger than it needs to be.
Jennifer Noble, for the record, this is also an issue, of course, in Washoe County. We've only been able to have, I think, since the pandemic began, 3 jury trials, and those were conducted with all sorts of precautions in place, but we're finding jurors are reluctant to sit on juries. We have our numbers going up and down in Washoe County, so that's also a challenge. So we've done the best we can. For example, we're having attorneys wear headphones so they can communicate with the judge by sidebar, but social distance from them so the jury can't hear. There's plexiglass, masks, but I'm also seeing defense motions saying that I don't want to be tried in this environment. I want to wait to have my trial. Now, of course, they're not necessarily waiving their speedy trial either, so this is going to create a lot of issues that our Supreme Court is going to have to sort out moving forward. It's a very sticky wicket, and we're having sentencings, of course, remote. Bail hearings are done remotely, but I have folks now asserting that they didn't want their sentencing to be conducted remotely, that violated their constitutional rights. And so these are all claims that come out of this unique situation in which we find ourselves that we'll be continuing to litigate for some time.
Thank you for those answers. I think as with every aspect, it's just another challenge and something that has to be addressed as we move forward. And then my next question is, you mentioned factors that are considered in setting bail. One of those was intensive supervision. Could you give me some examples of what those are? And then what happens if someone violates one of those conditions? And I'm assuming most of those check-ins are done virtually. So what happens if, they appear on camera and everything they say is good, great. So what happens if they violate those?
This is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. Intensive supervision is a fancy term that we use down here in Clark County specifically for check-in, regular check-ins, either telephonic or in-person check-ins. If they don't check in at their required time, either in person or via phone, then in theory, they're supposed to be arrested and brought back before the judge. I can tell you that doesn't always happen. What will typically happen is we'll show up in court at the next court date and the judge will say, hey, you missed 4 check-ins, what's going on? In addition to intensive supervision, we have what's called electronic monitoring program. And we have 3 levels here in Clark County: low level, mid-level, and then house arrest. And those are where people wear a GPS bracelet with increasing levels of restriction as you proceed up to house arrest. Our most intensive type of release is house arrest, where they have a bracelet on their ankle and they're restricted to their home. Now, they can also get permission to go to work or do any other required activities. So, we don't say you can't go to work when you're on this program, but generally, if you're not at work, you're required to be at your house with a monitor on. And they're actually very good about bringing in people who violate on the various levels of house arrest.
Thank you.
Go next to Vice Chair Wynn.
It's good to see you, Mr. Jones and Ms. Noble. I have a question. I know that I sat actually as vice chair on SJR 11, which was an interim study on pretrial bail, and there were several recommendations that came out. As you guys know, because you were present during most of those committee meetings as well, initially we were meeting in person because it was pre-COVID, and there were discussions about that time and the inability to comply with, I guess, the reasonable or what reasonable time was in getting those Valdez Jimenez hearings. And we heard some testimony from like rural areas in Alabama where they had like very limited population and they were doing things virtually or telephonically. And that was like pre-COVID. I know that many of the offices, including both of yours, received various CARES dollars to kind of upgrade some of your systems. Obviously, I think there could be done more. I heard in the Clark County District Attorney's Office that they provided all these headsets, not realizing that more than 75% of the computers didn't have cameras. So I know that there is a long ways to go in updating that technology. So, but in light of that, are there some takeaways from some of the COVID protections and regulations that have done that we think we can use forward in a positive way to get those hearings more timely, to include victims pursuant to Marsy's law? I know that having done sentencing myself, like I see a lot more victim participation, honestly, because they are able to participate, at least in Clark County, on that virtual format. So do you think there's any takeaways from some of the things that we've implemented that we would be able to continue on in order to speed things up?
This is Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I think that is a great question. And it highlights something that I think DAs have asked for even last session during the bail arguments that we had, is flexibility. What we don't want to see in statute are just rigid guidelines that may not work for rural jurisdiction. As long as there is what I would call a floor built in statute and some ability for rural jurisdictions to be innovative through telephonic appearances or video appearances, I think you'll find that we can support a lot of what the interim commission tried to do. But if that flexibility is not there, then that's when some of our rural DAs and rural DAs offices really have issues. And so I agree with your question. Yes, we absolutely support some of the things that have come to light during COVID, video technology, and the use of those to expedite defendants' constitutional hearings.
And I have one other question, and this is probably for both of your offices. Do you have any kind of updated information on, I know in the past we've heard and you guys have presented information about the percentage of cases that are screened, are out of screening, I guess. And I was wondering if you have any updated practices. We heard about some of these things to get rid of racial or implicit bias. But are there any new things that both of your offices are doing in order to address some of those issues already?
Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. The one thing I am prepared to discuss a little bit today is our domestic violence screening process. And something I think that we're going to talk about in this committee this year is the recent Supreme Court decision regarding the right to a jury trial for misdemeanor domestic violence cases. And based on that decision, we changed how we screen battery domestic violence cases, really looking for the power and control dynamics that are often at play in domestic violence cases. So we try to find, screen appropriately with respect to those cases. And so we're not overwhelming our justice courts with respect to battery domestic violence cases. That's one example I can give you. We have instituted other practices, Vice Chair Wynn. What they are specifically, though, I'm not prepared to discuss, but what I'll do is I'll reach out to the team chief of my screening unit and get back to you offline.
Jennifer Noble for the record. Assemblywoman, when I think that we have the same issues in terms of figuring out what to do with our domestic violence cases. We really are trying to look for that power and control dynamic, but we're also mindful that that might not necessarily be something that is apparent to us just from looking at a police report. So you could have a battery which is as simple as, he slapped the spatula out of my hand and threw his dinner at me, right? And that doesn't sound great. It sounds pretty bad, but it doesn't sound as bad as somebody who's being punched in the face or thrown down the stairs. But what you don't have is the history of that victim. You don't know what's going on in that house, and you don't know what that one incident that you know about is symptomatic of. And so that's something that concerns me, especially in a time where we don't have kids going to school that might be able to report what's going on in their home, and everyone's isolated. I am concerned about our ability to effectively do that. It's something that does concern me. In terms of other screening procedures like John, I don't have specifics for you this morning, but I can reach out to our folks and get those for you.
One more follow-up. Actually, this is a perfect segue because you were talking about battery domestic violence in that. I know in talking with some of the victim advocacy and survivor groups, as well as some of the groups that work with offenders in this area, and also speaking with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, they routinely are doing those lethality assessments or domestic violence index like assessments, and they are part of the arrest report. And I'm wondering if each of your offices are including that in their assessment at screening or even in that. I think it's one of those things, I don't see it. I don't know if you're not receiving them or if it's something that you're able to take into consideration. I know that there's several like bill draft requests that are going to be addressing battery domestic violence, and kind of making that more evidence-based and reasonable. So I was wondering if you could address some of that.
Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I'm going to have to get back to you on that question. To be perfectly honest, I can't remember seeing it in a packet, but I don't typically handle domestic violence cases. We have a unit who specializes in these cases due to their unique nature, as Ms. Noble just outlined. So I will, again, I don't mean to keep punting here, but I promise I will reach out to my domestic violence unit and get back to you on that question.
Jennifer Noble, Washoe County District Attorney's Office. I know we do have prosecutors who sit on the Domestic Fatality Review Committee and try to learn lessons from tragedies that have happened prior to that and look at timelines, et cetera. But in terms of that type of information being given to us regarding a particular case, no, I don't believe we're receiving that in reports. We're just trying to apply what we've learned from things that have happened in the past to what we see in the police report, the photographs, the statements of the victim, et cetera.
Thank you. And if there is other information that you can get from your various offices when you go back, if you can provide them to our committee, I think everyone probably will have some interest in that.
Okay, any further questions? Give me a show of hands if there's a question out there that hasn't been asked. I don't see anyone. Mr. Jones, Ms. Noble, I had a really quick question. I don't know if you know the answer to this. I probably should have asked the courts yesterday, but with most hearings going online or virtual, other than the, I forget what it's called in Clark County, but the detainment hearings are still in person. But do you know, is there an ability for members of the public or members of this committee, if we have time, to be able to tune in online to watch, you know, a district court calendar or a justice court calendar? Do you know if that option is available? And if so, if you can point us to how we would find that out, or I could reach out to the courts as well to ask.
Jennifer Noble, Washoe County District Attorney's Office. Yes, on the Second Judicial District Court's website, each day you will be able to see what the criminal calendar is for each judge, and you can click on links that let you observe the hearings in real time. So we do have that. It's, I believe, washoecourts.us.
And Jon Jones on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I don't believe our courts are posting the links online, but each district court does have we use the Blue Jeans program in district court as our video provider. And we do have links. So I can assist that in getting the committee any links that they want to observe a hearing with the judge's permission, of course. And or if not, you can directly reach out to the courts, but they are available and you can observe via Blue Jeans.
Great, thank you too. And you know, it's hard for us obviously because we meet at 8 in the morning most days, which I think conflicts typically with the calendars. But committee members, if there are days where we don't have committee, and there will be such days, I promise you, that would be a good use of your time if you don't have experience in this world at all, just to even tune in to watch a sentencing hearing or to watch a defendant enter a plea or to watch a preliminary hearing in justice court. If all those terms sound unfamiliar to you, then it may make sense to do that. So if you do have time and you're interested, reach out to me or to one of our presenters today, and we'll make sure that you get that link and you're able to participate. In an ideal world, I've said for years, I'd love to take the committee on a field trip up to some of the courtrooms around here, but it's just hasn't happened yet, and probably not going to happen this session unless things really change for the better before the end of session. But I do commend that to you. I think it's invaluable to see these things up close and personal. Mr. Jones, Ms. Noble, want to thank you so much for your patience this morning, for presenting to the committee and for answering questions. As you guys know, you'll be frequent participants in these committee hearings, and we're certainly hopeful that we will be able to get the building open before the end of session and have you here in person. But until then, we look forward to interacting with you over this virtual medium, and please feel free to reach out to me or any of the members regarding issues that might come up during the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Okay, committee members, we are going to close that agenda item, and we're now going to move on to our period of public comment. I do believe we have some folks in the public comment line. So just as a reminder for folks on the line and listening in, we're going to have up to 30 minutes of public comment. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. I will gently remind you when that 2 minutes has expired if you're still talking. And if you could just remember to please state your name before you start speaking, that would be really, really helpful. So BPS, if we could go to the public comment line, please. And if we have callers there, if we could have the first one proceed. Thank you.
Would the caller with the last 3 digits of 037 please slowly state and then spell your name for the record? You will have 2 minutes.
Tanya Brown, Advocates for the Inmates and the Innocent, TONJA BROWN. I want to bring up AB 104 bill. That was, I believe by removing the words of imprisonment, it doesn't give the true amount of the injustice that has been done to that individual. The person may have spent months or possibly years incarcerated in our jails, and especially dealing with the COVID. Who knows how long it would take? I believe that time should begin at the time of arrest. When dealing with the jail time, a person will receive credit for those days to go towards their release. This compensation bill should be applied the same way. Otherwise, the amount of damages for those who have been wrongfully convicted could amount to them losing $25,000 per year for each year they spent in custody, whether it was in jail or in prison. Also, the Nevada prison deaths have reached 39 inmates and 3 staff members. So if the inmates are appealing their convictions, who have maintained their innocence, and if they die before it's over for them, their loved ones, justice should not die because of their death. Now, I want to briefly touch on what Ms. Noble had said. There are some new members, so I'm just going to make it really brief. In 2009, the Honorable Judge Bryn Adams ordered District Attorney Dick Gammack to turn over the entire file in Mr. Klein's case. When the file was turned over, all the exculpatory evidence that showed another man had committed the crime and everything that was favorable to the defense was withheld by his notations. In June of June 1993, I actually sat down with the defendant's public defender, where she admitted to me she had committed perjury during the 1991 post-conviction hearing. I will be providing you approximately a 75-page sworn affidavit, and in this affidavit, it goes into great detail on how far our judicial system went to cover up their mistakes at the expense of an innocent person. Also,
Ms. Brown, could I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yes. Also, on the imprisonment time, I think we need to. Hold on one second. I've lost the page. I'm sorry. I've got the dogs kind of playing with each other behind me and interfering with what I'm trying to say, and I'm sorry about that. Oh, yeah, and so on sections 3A, 1 and 2, A, B, and C, I'd like to see, with the exception of those who are exonerated after death or posthumously, the date should begin at the time the person would have become eligible for parole to the street. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. It's good to hear from you in public comment. And I will remind you that should Assembly Bill 104 be agendized for a hearing, we'll take testimony on that particular bill at that time, and you'll be able to offer some comments there as well. So thank you. BPS, anybody else on the line for public comment?
Would the caller with the last three digits of 164 please slowly state your name and then spell your name for the record? You will have 2 minutes and you may begin now.
Anne Marie Grant, Annemare, Grant, Grant, sister of Thomas Purdy, murdered by Reno PD and Washoe County Sheriffs. My brother was hog-tied during a mental health crisis for 40 minutes and then asphyxiated by deputies. I know there's nothing in the legislature now, but I would like to mention that the Washoe County DA's office does not even get involved or make any type of ruling when someone dies at the jail, and my brother was one of 3 men that were asphyxiated to death by deputies at the jail. I also wanted to mention that I had put in a public records request with Washoe County District Attorney's Office regarding their integrity conviction committee, and I believe that we need something also legislatively mandated regarding that, because since the inception of the committee, which I was told was 2018, and Ms. Noble stated to the committee today it was 2017, so I'm not sure which is actually accurate, but they've only reviewed, and I put that in air quotes, reviewed one case, and I happen to know that they didn't do any type of actual review of the case, because I went to one of the courthouses with Ms. Brown, who was a previous caller, and one of the court decisions wasn't even able to be pulled up online, and it was actually an archive off-site where nobody could have access to it until it had been requested, which it had not. So the DA's office really isn't doing anything to help people who are wrongfully convicted. Their position is a jury of 12 people can't make a better decision than a jury of 12 people, but we all know that eyewitness identification is the number one, for wrongful convictions. That's all. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for your public comment. BPS, anybody else on the line?
Yes. Would the caller with the last three digits of 167 please slowly state and then spell your name for the record? You will have 2 minutes and you may begin now. Caller with the last three digits of 167, would you please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You may begin now. Chair, we have no more callers on the line, and I'm not getting a response from caller 167.
Great, thank you so much. If caller 167 is out there and can hear us, there might be some technical difficulties, but please feel free to either email a public comment, or you could tune into a future meeting of Assembly Judiciary to provide that public comment. So at this time, we'll close the public comment portion of the meeting. Before we get to announcements, anything from any committee members? Okay, I don't see anything. So committee, again, want to thank you. I know it was a pretty long morning with a couple of presentations, and you're probably on information overload, which is to be expected this early in the session, but we will get through this. And just looking ahead to what comes next in the Assembly Judiciary Committee, continuing on with what I have called Justice Week. Tomorrow, we have a couple of presentations from our public defender representatives. So today we heard from the district attorneys. Tomorrow we'll have the public defenders. We're also going to hear from Chief Justice Hardesty of the Supreme Court. And then we're going to hear our first bill tomorrow morning as well. That's Assembly Bill 17 that was referenced by the Division of Parole and Probation about discharges from probation. So that'll be an exciting morning when we finally have a chance to hear our first bill. Again, Thursday, we've got some presentations in a bill. Reminder that Thursday will start at 9 o'clock rather than 8 o'clock. And then Friday, we have a meeting as well with a couple of bills. I believe we have agendas out through next Wednesday of next week. Just a couple of quick announcements there. Monday, the 15th, will start at 9 o'clock as well. So that'll be a little bit later than normal. And then we have bill hearings on Tuesday and Wednesday. So as bills come in, we'll try to get those scheduled for hearing. And I think that's it on the Assembly Judiciary Committee front. So I guess I will see all of you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And we're going to I want to thank everyone for tuning in, for logging in so early today, because I think we're going to need the full 3+ hours tomorrow as well. So if everyone can make an effort to be logged on and ready to go by 8 o'clock, that'll help. And we don't want to keep Chief Justice Hardesty waiting any longer than we have to. So thank you all again for this morning's meeting. We'll see you tomorrow morning. This meeting is adjourned.